Department leaders said the technology, quote, will change society and ultimately the character of war. The new projects would mark a significant jump in federal AI spending. The government spends more than $2 billion on AI research and development during the 2017 fiscal year, according to White House estimates of unclassified programs not including key Pentagon and intelligence budgets. The DARPA allocation would be on top of the ongoing spending. The funding comes at a time of increasing U.S. caution over China's national AI strategy. The Chinese government has invested heavily in multi-year technological campaigns aimed at supercharging a domestic AI market the country has projected could be worth $150 billion by 2020. Chinese tech giants such as Alibaba and Baidu work closely with the government on AI that could have applications for autonomous vehicles, healthcare, and national security. China has unveiled detailed guidelines and regulations on AI, some of which, U.S. researchers contend, echo a technological roadmap rolled out during the Obama administration, and used AI such as facial recognition to empower national surveillance and expand government control. Quoting China's Minister of Science and Technology, Chinese state media reported in May that the country wanted to lead the world in AI by 2030. Founded to counter Soviet research during the Cold War, DARPA is credited with helping develop the modern Internet and the building blocks of commercial AI, including some of the first self-driving cars and early versions of Siri, the virtual assistant, in Apple iPhones. The agency sponsors research challenges and solicits proposal from researchers whose work would bring forth transformational technological leaps. It has helped fund the work of a vast range of scientists and engineers across academia and private industry, including Google's founders Sergey Brin and Larry Page, who both benefited from DARPA funding during their graduate work. But workers at Google and tech giants have in recent months pushed back forcefully against collaborating with the government, military, or law enforcement. Workers for Microsoft and Amazon, whose employees are developing facial recognition software, have campaigned against the company's work with federal immigration officials and local police forces. DARPA's proposal offers have traditionally promised AI researchers a chance at tackling futuristic problems away from the commercial timelines and financial imperatives of private companies. And while researchers say the proposals have long appealed to senses of public service and patriotism, they are also increasingly offering AI experts the ability to work on issues of ethics, safety, and privacy, the kinds of topics increasingly in vogue among Silicon Valley's top AI minds. Still, this isn't a blue sky place, Heinem said. Everything we do, even the fundamental work, we know why we're doing it. We work for defense. Apple faces Trump's ire after company says its products would be hurt by tariffs. By Tony Romm. President Trump on Saturday took aim at Apple after the tech giant said the White House's proposed tariffs on China could result in price increases on popular consumer devices such as AirPods, the company's wireless headphones, and the Apple Watch. In a tweet, Trump said there's an easy solution to Apple's potential woes that also came with a tax break. Make your products in the United States instead of China. Start building new plants now. Exciting. Apple declined to comment on the president's tweet. Earlier this week, Apple said in a regulatory filing that the president's proposed $200 billion in fresh tariffs on China would cover a wide range of Apple products, from its Mac Mini computer to cables, chargers, and laptop cases. Our concern with these tariffs is that the U.S. will be hardest hit, and that it will result in lower U.S. growth and competitiveness and higher prices for U.S. consumers, the company said. Since then, though, Trump has threatened an additional $267 billion of tariffs on China, a move revealed Friday that could cover virtually all Chinese-made goods entering the United States. The tariffs are top of mind for Apple chief executive Tim Cook, who has personally lobbied Trump for months on issues of taxes and trade, even dining with the President and First Lady Melania Trump at Trump National Golf Club in Bedminster, New Jersey last month. Cook's personal diplomacy stands in stark contrast to some of his peers in the tech industry who haven't engaged Trump directly and often are on the receiving end of far more aggressive tweets attacking their business practices. Apple, like other tech giants, has benefited from last year's overhaul to the U.S. tax code, and the company has committed to returning much of the $252 billion in cash it held abroad. In January, the company also announced its direct contribution to the U.S. economy through investments and other spending would exceed $350 billion over the next 5 years, while it would establish a new Apple campus to house technical support for customers. Some components for Apple products, including glass from manufacturers like Corning, are made in the United States, the company has said. Trump previously has claimed that Apple is building new plants in the U.S., but the iPhone maker has not announced any such plans. Amazon's antitrust antagonist has a breakthrough idea by David Streitfeld. The dead books are on the top floor of Southern Methodist University's Law Library. Antitrust Dilemma, The Antitrust Impulse, Antitrust in an Expanding Economy. Shelf after shelf of volumes ignored for decades. There are a dozen fat tomes with transcripts of the congressional hearings on monopoly power in 1949, when the world was in ruins and the Soviets on the march. Lawmakers believed economic concentration would make America more vulnerable. At the end of the antitrust stacks is a table near the window. "This is my command post," said Lena Khan. It's nothing really. A few books are piled up haphazardly next to a bottle with water and another with tea. Ms. Khan was in Dallas quite a bit over the last year, refining an argument about monopoly power that takes aim at one of the most admired, secretive, and feared companies of our era, Amazon. The retailer overwhelmingly dominates online commerce, employs more than 500,000 people, and powers much of the Internet itself through its cloud computing division. On Tuesday, it briefly became the second company to be worth $1 trillion. If competitors tremble at Amazon's ambitions, consumers are mostly delighted by its speedy delivery and low prices. They stream its Oscar-winning movies and clamor for the company to build a second headquarters in their hometowns. Few of Amazon's customers, it is safe to say, spend much time thinking they need to be protected from it. But then, until recently, no one worried about Facebook, Google, or Twitter either. Now politicians, the media, academics, and regulators are kicking around ideas that would, metaphorically or literally, cut them down to size. Members of Congress grilled social media executives on Wednesday in yet another round of hearings on Capitol Hill. Not since the Department of Justice took on Microsoft in the mid-1990s has big tech been scrutinized like this. Amazon has more revenue than Facebook, Google, and Twitter put together, but it has largely escaped sustained examination. That is beginning to change, and one significant reason is Ms. Khan. In early 2017, when she was an unknown law student, Ms. Khan published Amazon's Antitrust Paradox, in the Yale Law Journal. Her argument went against a consensus in antitrust circles that dates back to the 1970s, the moment when regulation was redefined to focus on consumer welfare, which is to say price. Since Amazon is renowned for its cut-rate deals, it would seem safe from federal intervention. Ms. Kahn disagreed. Over 93 heavily footnoted pages, she presented the case that the company should not get a pass on anti-competitive behavior just because it makes customers happy. Once robust monopoly laws have been marginalized, Ms. Kahn wrote, and consequently Amazon is amassing structural power that lets it exert increasing control over many parts of the economy. Amazon has so much data on so many customers, it is so willing to forego profits, it is so aggressive, and has so many advantages from its shipping and warehouse infrastructure that it exerts an influence much broader than its market share. It resembles the all-powerful railroads of the progressive era, Ms. Kahn wrote. The thousands of retailers and independent businesses that must ride Amazon's rails to reach market are increasingly dependent on their biggest competitor. The paper got 146,255 hits, a runaway bestseller in the world of legal treatises. That popularity has rocked the antitrust establishment and is making an unlikely celebrity of Ms. Kahn in the corridors of Washington. She has her own critics now. Several leading scholars have found fault with Ms. Kahn's proposals to revive and expand antitrust, and some have tried to dismiss her paper with a mocking label that is hipster antitrust. Unwilling or perhaps unable to accept that a woman wrote a breakthrough legal text, they keep talking about bearded dudes. Ms. Kahn was born in London to Pakistani parents who emigrated to the United States when she was 11. She is now 29, an Amazon critic whose Amazon account is largely inactive, newly married to a Texas doctor who uses his Amazon Prime account all the time. Ms. Kahn was supposed to move this summer to Los Angeles, where she had a clerkship with Stephen Reinhardt, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals judge and liberal icon, but he suddenly died in March. Instead, Ms. Kahn is set to start a fellowship at Columbia this fall and is considering other projects as well. There is no shortage of parties that want her advice on how to reckon with big tech. As consumers, as users, we love these tech companies, she said. But as citizens, as workers, and as entrepreneurs, we recognize that their power is troubling. We need a new framework, a new vocabulary for how to assess and address their dominance. At the SMU Library in Dallas, Ms. Kahn was finding that vocabulary. These dead books, many from an era that predated the price-based era of monopoly law, were an influence and an inspiration. She was planning to expand her essay into a book, she said, in an interview here in June. Then her life shifted, and she abruptly went from an outsider proposing reform to an insider formulating policy. Rohit Chopra, a new Democratic commissioner at the Federal Trade Commission, pulled her in as a temporary advisor in July, at a time when urgent questions about privacy, data, competition, and antitrust were suddenly in the air. The FTC is holding a series of hearings this fall, the first of their type since 1995, on whether a changing economy requires changing enforcement attitudes. The hearings will begin on September 13 at Georgetown University Law Center. 2 panels will debate whether antitrust should keep its narrow focus or, as Ms. Kahn urges, expand its range. Ideas and assumptions that it was heretical to question are now openly being contested, she said. We're finally beginning to examine how antitrust laws, which were rooted in deep suspicion of concentrated private power, now often promote it. Genuinely original voices are rare in Washington policy circles, and Mr. Chopra is pleased to have Ms. Khan in his camp. It's rare to come across a legal prodigy like Lina Khan, he said. Nothing about her career is typical. You don't see many law students publish groundbreaking legal research, or research that had such a deep impact so quickly. Ida Tarbell, the journalist whose investigation of Standard Oil helped bring about its breakup, wrote this about John D. Rockefeller in 1905. It takes time to crush men who are pursuing legitimate trade, but one of Mr. Rockefeller's most impressive characteristics is patience. He was like a general who, besieging a city surrounded by fortified hills, views from a balloon the whole great field, and sees how, this point taken, that must fall, this hill reached, that fort is commanded, and nothing was too small. The corner grocery in Browntown, the humble refining still on Oil Creek, the shortest private pipeline, nothing, for little things grow. When Ms. Khan read that, she thought, Jeff Bezos. Her Yale Law Journal paper argued that monopoly regulators who focus on consumer prices are thinking too short-term. In Ms. Khan's view, a company like Amazon, one that sells things, competes against others selling things, and owns the platform where the deals are done, has an inherent advantage that undermines fair competition. The long-term interests of consumers include product quality, variety, and innovation, factors best promoted through both a robust competitive process and open markets, she wrote. The issue Ms. Khan's article really brought to the fore is this: do we trust Amazon or any large company to create our future? In think tanks and universities, the battle has been joined. It's one thing to say that antitrust enforcement has gotten far too weak, said Daniel Crane, a University of Michigan scholar who doesn't agree with Ms. Khan, but credits her with opening up a much-needed debate. It's a bridge much further to say we should go back to the populist goal of leveling playing fields and checking bigness. As Mr. Crane writes in a forthcoming Law Review article, antitrust law stands at its most fluid and negotiable moment in a generation. The resistance is fierce and prominent. Herbert Hovenkamp, an antitrust expert at the University of Pennsylvania Law School, wrote that if companies like Amazon are targeted simply because their low prices hurt competitors, we might quickly drive the economy back into the Stone Age, imposing hysterical costs on everyone. Timothy Murris, a former chairman of the FTC, and Jonathan Nuclerlane, a former FTC general counsel, published a paper in June that was a response to Ms. Khan and the antitrust reform movement. Called Antitrust in the Internet Era, it was about the A&P grocery chain. A&P essentially invented the modern supermarket in the 1920s. With its low prices, wide range of products, and penchant for disruption, the chain became the leading retailer of its era. It owned 70 factories and eliminated middlemen, which allowed it to keep costs down. And yet, Mr. Murris and Mr. Nuclerlane wrote, A&P's very popularity triggered a backlash. The government pursued A&P on antitrust grounds during the 1940s, egged on by competitors that could not compete. After decades of decline, A&P shut its doors for good in 2015. The analogies with Amazon are explicit. Don't let the government pursue Amazon the way it pursued A&P, Mr. Murris and Mr. Nuclerlane warned. Amazon has added hundreds of billions of dollars of value to the U.S. economy, they wrote. It is a brilliant innovator whose breakthroughs have in turn helped launch new waves of innovation across retail and technology sectors to the great benefit of consumers. Amazon itself could not have made the argument any better, which isn't surprising because in a footnote on the first page, the authors noted, We approached Amazon Inc. for funding to tell the story of A&P, and we gratefully acknowledge its support. They added at the end of footnote 85, the authors have advised Amazon on a variety of antitrust issues. Amazon declined to say how much its support came to in dollars. It also declined to comment on Ms. Khan or her paper directly, but issued a statement as follows. We operate in a diverse range of businesses, from retail to entertainment to consumer electronics and technology services. And we have intense and well-established competition in each of these areas. Retail is our largest business today, and we represent less than 1% of global retail. The first time Ms. Khan held power to account involved a Starbucks in suburban New York that was banning students from sitting down. Ms. Khan decided to write an article about the policy. Starbucks wouldn't answer her questions, but she managed to interview the employees. The New York Times picked up on the tempest, leaning on her reporting. Ms. Khan was 15, a correspondent for her high school newspaper. Her father was a management consultant, her mother an executive in information services. Ms. Khan went to Williams College, where she wrote a thesis on the political philosopher Hannah Arendt. She was the editor of the student paper, but worked hard at everything. We were routinely emailing each other on separate floors of the library as it was closing at 2 a.m., said Amanda Corman, a classmate. Like many a wonkish youth, Ms. Khan headed to Washington after graduating in 2010, applying for a position at the left-leaning New America Foundation. Barry Lynn, who headed the organization's Open Markets Anti-Monopoly Initiative, seized on her application. It's so much easier to teach public policy to people who already know how to write than to teach writing to public policy experts, said Mr. Lynn, a former journalist. Somewhat to her surprise, Ms. Khan is becoming a public figure. Before beginning her stint at the FTC, she said the news of her working there might be no more than a sentence or two at news sites that cover policy intensively. Instead, it was a full-fledged story. The Information, a tech news site, declared, Amazon antitrust push slowly gains ground. Politico just named her one of the Politico 50, its annual list of people driving the ideas driving politics. Balancing the attention and the achievement, the expectations and the demands is difficult, perhaps impossible. I don't think of my work in grandiose terms. I feel an urgency, but I'm also wary of hubris, Ms. Khan said. Nobody has been expecting this to succeed. I'm awed by the challenge. And this has been Gene reading from the World of Computing.
You've just been listening to The World of Computers, brought to you from the Talking Information Center. If you would like to listen to any part of this program again, you can always access it on our website. How convenient, ticnetwork.org.
Here's a look at the forecast from the National Weather Service. Partly sunny today, temperatures in the mid-70s. Increasing clouds tonight, lows dropping down to the low 60s, and Saturday, mostly cloudy, turning sunny, temperatures in the mid-70s. Stay tuned for more coming your way next on the Talking Information Center.
Dear listener, we have some good news to share with you. The Talking Information Center is expanding its programming lineup, and for the first time, we will be offering a 24-hour, 7-day-a-week schedule. This means that we will no longer be including any repeats in our regular broadcast schedule. We have added many daily local newspapers to fulfill the requests of listeners across the state. And while all the programs we currently air will still be available, you may notice that many of them have changed the times when they air to accommodate the expansion. If you have access to the internet, we always invite you to visit our website, ticnetwork.org. There, you can listen to your favorite archived shows at a time that is most convenient for you. The new expanded TIC schedule will begin airing Monday, September 17th. If you would like a copy of the new program schedule mailed to you in either large print format or on audio CD, please give us a call at 781-834-4400. That's 781-834-4400. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is volunteer reader John broadcasting from Springfield, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Please stay tuned to the Talking Information Center for the Christian Science Monitor. It's coming up next.
Good morning. This is Paula. Today I'm reading articles from the Christian Science Monitor for Friday, September the 14th, 2018. We begin, as usual, in the World section. Our first headline reads, South Sudan's midwives, boosted by aid, wonder how long donors will deliver. This article is by Ryan Lenore Brown, who is a staff writer at the Monitor, and it's dated September the 13th. It was July 9th, 2011, and just outside the walls of the maternity ward at the largest public hospital in the city, a country was being born. Inside, meanwhile, babies were also being born. Lots and lots of babies. As Dr. Alice Petilla scrambled through her rounds, the wails of the newest citizens of the world's newest country mixed with the cheers of a crowd outside. Throughout the delivery ward, mothers sprawled on the thin metal beds talked names. Independence, she heard one suggest. Yes, that was a good name for a girl, elegant and strong. Salva Kiir offered another after the man who had been their president for all of 20 minutes. You have never seen mothers so happy, said Dr. Petilla, remembering her shift at the Juba Teaching Hospital that Saturday, the day South Sudan became independent from Sudan. But medical staff, too, were hopeful. South Sudan was now on the map, literally and metaphorically. That meant faraway governments were suddenly ready to cut big checks in the name of making life better in the world's youngest country. In scrappy maternity wards like the one in Juba, where power flickered on and off, and nurses frequently asked patients to buy gloves and needles, money poured in. Every day, the quality of care was getting better. Every day we could do more than the day before it, said Petilla. The maternity ward where she worked was renovated, and next to it the country's first neonatal intensive care unit sprung up, full of incubators and tiny cradles. South Sudanese doctors and nurses who had scattered around the globe began returning, ready to work. Then came the fighting. Since 2013, a civil war has severely tested the strength of the world's altruism here, making South Sudan one of the most expensive places to deliver aid and one of the most dangerous. Over the past 5 years, global donors have given an average of more than $1 billion annually to South Sudan, most of it for short-term humanitarian assistance. The cost of doing business here has become enormous, says Mary Otieno, the South Sudan country representative for the United Nations Population Fund, UNFPA. All of this creates a lot of unnecessary and all of this creates a lot of uncertainty, and therefore donors are not willing to invest in the long term. In maternity wards like Petilla's, many became worried for the future. They still do. How much longer, they wonder, will the donors with fat checkbooks keep hearing about South Sudan before they simply give up? How long can you convince the world to keep giving to a place that seems in many ways to keep falling apart? When South Sudan became independent, many donors immediately turned their attention to its health system. which had been decimated by 5 decades of conflict. They were particularly concerned with one statistic. Of every 100,000 women who gave birth in South Sudan, more than 2,000 died. It was one of the highest maternal mortality rates in the world, about 150 times the rate in the United States, and more than 500 times the rate in Finland at the time. Fewer than 1 in 5 women had a trained professional to assist them when they gave birth. Funders pledged money to train midwives. The country had only 8 at independence, and kit out health facilities. South Sudanese doctors and nurses returned to quite literally deliver their country, its next generation. I felt like, let me come to do this for my country, said Pitia, who had grown up in Khartoum, the capital of Sudan. And anyway, the money wasn't bad. She made 4,000 South Sudanese pounds, then around $2,000 a month. But in December 2013, less than 2.5 years after she celebrated Independence Day in the maternity ward, forces loyal to South Sudan's President Salva Kiir clashed with the troops of its Vice President Riek Machar. The conflict quickly spiraled into a full-blown civil war. Oil production, the source of 95% of government revenue, ground to a halt. As South Sudan's government struggled to keep pace with its bills, it began printing more money, tanking the value of the currency. Today, for example, Petia's monthly pay is worth around $30, and she makes most of her money doing consulting on the side in private clinics. Nurses and midwives, paid even less than the doctors, began hassling patients for cash. Next, the hospital began to run out of medicine, and then basic supplies. Across the country, meanwhile, forces on both sides attacked and looted clinics. By 2016, half the medical facilities in the country had been destroyed, according to government estimates. Even in Juba, the capital, women often died giving birth at home at night because they were afraid to cross notoriously dangerous government checkpoints to reach nearby hospitals. By 2016, the government estimated that only 9% of women were giving birth with the help of a doctor or midwife in a health facility. Still, at the teaching hospital in Juba, the staff did what they could. Judith Draleru, a Ugandan midwife working for UNFPA, rallied her colleagues to help clean the wards, since the cleaners, whose salaries were now worth only a few dollars a month, had mostly stopped showing up to work. When a patient needed blood, Miss Draleru asked her friends to donate, or she did it herself. When there were no gloves available to assist with the delivery, she slipped plastic bags over her hands and carried on, sometimes working by the light of candles the mothers had brought themselves. Every day, despite all our challenges, you see that you are saving mothers and you are saving babies, so how can you stop, she says. I am the commander-in-chief of these babies' lives. But for many others, the question is flipped. Without money, without supplies, without support, how long will it be possible to go on? At the teaching hospital, the next potential casualty is an ambitious midwife training program. Since 2012, the program, which is funded by the Swedish and Canadian governments, has trained more than 600 midwives here and scattered them across the country. What we've done so far is just a drop in the ocean, so we are hopeful the program will find a way to continue, says Ms. Otieno of UNFPA, which runs the midwife training course. But there will not be a new first-year class next year unless we get another donor. Like many here, she's hopeful that a recent peace agreement will bring enough stability to convince donors they can fund long-term projects here. Hopeful that after 7 years the world is not yet ready to give up on South Sudan. But for the South Sudanese themselves, forgetting about this place has never been an option. If we leave, this country doesn't have a future, says Pitia, shrugging. All her life, she says, she was waiting to have her own country. Now that she does, she isn't about to leave it. Across town, meanwhile, in a tiny clinic in the Gumbo neighborhood, Dralaroo is helping train a group of traditional birth attendants, a kind of catch-all term for the women neighbors know to call when one of them goes into labor. Together, the attendants practice basic hygiene, washing their hands and snipping umbilical cords with clean, sharp razors. These trainings are essential, Dralaroo says, because most mothers never make it to the hospital. Why do I keep doing this? Because you cannot say no to a woman in your community who needs you, says Brigina Wasuk, one of the students, who has been delivering babies for more than a decade in her Juba neighborhood. It's not an option for us. So again, this article was written by Ryan Lenora Brown of the Monitor, with assistance from Silvano Yokwi, who contributed reporting. And support for this story was also provided by the International Women's Media Foundation. Moving on to our second headline, still in the world section of today's Monitor. The headline reads, amid trade fight, Canada returns to its roots in opposition to U.S. This article is by Sarah Miller-Lana, who is a staff writer at the Monitor, dated September 13th. Thomas Jefferson, in drumming up support for war against the British Empire in 1812, boasted that capturing the territory that is now Canada would be a mere matter of marching. That sense of American superiority was voiced 206 years ago, but it feels uncomfortably familiar to modern-day Canadians like Eugene Oatley, a descendant of a United Empire loyalist, American colonist who fled north at the Revolutionary War and sought refuge under the British Crown. As President Trump threatens the ruination of Canada and renegotiation of the North American Free Trade Agreement, NAFTA, Canadians are not only surprised but angered. Old complexes about the Canadian-American relationship, one that has been among the most peaceful in the world for two bordering countries, are resurfacing. Trump is using the same old bullying tactics. It's like 200 years all over again, says Mr. Oatley, who on a blustery day is standing at Lundy's Lane in Niagara Falls, site of one of the fiercest battles of the War of 1812. No side could declare outright victory that day, not unlike the competing visions of victory in the war itself. But for British North America, the battle thwarted a U.S. advance and takeover and showed how misguided the American Founding Fathers' war rhetoric was. You have to face bullies, Oatley says, adding that it is as true now as then. You can't run away from them. Some have dismissed Mr. Trump's moves as boorish, that the market forces will eventually curtail, but his tactics have raised anxious questions about how dependent Canada, which sends 75% of its exports south, remains on the U.S. They've also rekindled a form of nationalism, which in many Western countries translates into the exclusion of others, but in multicultural and multilingual Canada more often takes the shape of anti-Americanism. It's always there, the sense that we are different than the Americans, says historian Jack Granatstein, who wrote the book Yankee Go Home, Canadians and Anti-Americanism, which traces an undercurrent of anti-Americanism in Canadian society since the American Revolution. We are loyalists, they are rebels. We believe in peace, order, and good government, not life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. There's always a sense that somehow the United States is out of step with us, and at no point is that clearer than the present. Trump has made every Canadian government that follows aware that you can't trust the Americans now. Canada was built upon a vision that was explicitly distinct from the U.S., starting as early as 1776. The Loyalists were the first significant wave of English-speaking settlers in Canada and fundamental to its identity. Today, the United Empire Loyalists Association of Canada is still a popular club. Oatley sits on the board of the largest of the branches in Niagara, Loyalist Heartland at the U.S. border. Their patriotism is seen in the initials EU they place after their names to affirm their heritage. This region, along the Great Lakes, later became the main theater of the War of 1812, with battlegrounds dotting the landscape along the Niagara River. The conflict confirmed a wariness of the U.S. and the need to defend itself. The war's resistance heroes are some of the most celebrated historic figures, which would continue through the founding of Canada. When the province of Canada with New Brunswick and Nova Scotia joined together to create Canada in 1867, the driving motivation was to resist an American invasion and American-style extremes. We were terrified of a United States that had just gone through a civil war, says Michael Adams, president of the Environics Institute for Survey Research, which measures Canadian attitudes. There were a lot of things that Canadians didn't like about the United States: slavery, civil wars, guns, and violence, he said. So we actually formed ourselves in opposition to the United States. In the last century, as the U.S. grew as the world superpower, staking positions that were controversial around the globe, Canada worked hard to find its own place, consuming American culture and products, but often at pains to define itself as, above all, not American. Canadian governments often disagreed with American foreign policy positions, from the Vietnam War to the invasion of Iraq in 2003. But trade barriers continued to fall, bringing down with them political ones as well. Dan Chiruyak, an international trade expert at the C.D. Howe Institute, a think tank in Toronto, says that despite continual disputes, both economic and political convergence has been the dominant theme for the past generation, even after 9/11, when fears of terrorism caused the U.S. to fortify its borders. In Canada and the U.S., there's this narrative of we don't just trade together, we build things together, we do things together. And while there was a thickening of the border post 9/11, which was never really resolved, there was still that sense that the relationship was one of partnership, he says. For many, Trump's actions have proved that illusory. Trump has been widely unpopular in Canada since before the election, but tariffs issued on the grounds of, quote, national security were deeply offensive to most Canadians. Weeks later, he dissed Prime Minister Justin Trudeau after the Group of Seven met in Quebec as, quote, weak, and, quote, an insult that buoyed support for the Canadian leader across the political spectrum. In the latest spat, the U.S. seemed to shut Canada out of the NAFTA negotiations, forging a deal on the sidelines with Mexico and then giving Canada a deadline to sign or leave it. As talks have stalled, Trump has hurled successive insults threatening to put tariffs on cars, which TD Bank analysts have shown could cost Canada 160,000 jobs, the majority in Ontario. Trump has tried to back Canada into a corner, to force Ottawa to open the Canadian dairy or cultural market or loosen the independent trade dispute system. In the midst of negotiations, he told reporters in off-the-record comments that the U.S. will not compromise with Canada. It's going to be so insulting they're not going to be able to make a deal, he said, according to the Toronto Star, which published the bombshell remarks. Trudeau has been criticized by some for misplaying the U.S., by others for playing it up. Trump stirs the nationalism, and Trudeau is riding on it. Granatstein, the historian, says. Oldley says Trudeau has no choice but to stand strong. He says the U.S. can't, quote, ruin Canada. Trump could hurt us, he says, but that would hurt the U.S. too. Trudeau said this week that auto tariffs, quote, would be devastating, obviously, to the Canadian auto industry, but would also be devastating to the American auto industry, end quote. Members of the U.S. Congress and industry leaders have come out backing Canada, saying they will not support a trade deal without all three original NAFTA signatories on board. Canadians are shocked and appalled, but they are not intimidated. All this mindless bluster is really not affecting the Canadian position in these negotiations, says Gordon Ritchie, a former Canadian ambassador for trade negotiations and deputy chief negotiator of the Canada-U.S. Free Trade Agreement. It's not just rhetoric to say that Canada will only sign on to a good deal. But in the trade maelstrom, attitudes have shifted. Since Trump was elected, more Canadians hold unfavorable views of the U.S. than favorable ones. For the first time since Environics began measuring opinions in 1982. At the grassroots level, the clash is translated into a surge of patriotism at the grocery store and travel agency, with a #BuyCanadian movement taking off on social media. When Canada announced $12.6 billion in retaliatory tariffs this summer, only 20% of Canadians said they were opposed, despite the vulnerable economic position that Canada finds itself in. And while Canadians said their protest is not directed at Americans, individual Americans are feeling it. Eddie Ng, an economics professor at Dalhousie University's Rouse School of Business in Halifax, is conducting a study of American expats in Canada with Thomas Coelen of the University of Bern in Switzerland. The two started collecting experiences in the Canadian workplace after Trump was inaugurated. Professor Ng says that more than half of respondents say they feel they are treated differently because of nationality. At the same time, Canadians, whose multiculturalism is celebrated as part of the national identity, don't see American bashing as politically incorrect. That inconsistency goes back to geography and history, Ng said. We always define ourselves by what the Americans are not. Michael Byers, who holds the Canada Research Chair in Global Politics and International Law at the University of British Columbia, says Canada over the years has moved further away from the U.S., particularly over culture war issues from guns to gay marriage. Today, that is no clearer than at the top, where Trudeau has come to symbolize the liberal world order and Trump the populism nipping at its edges. He says those trends continue, but they are not necessarily anti-American in nature, and the vast majority of Canadians distinguish between the administration and the American population. Canadians are very concerned by how Trump has turned a positive binational relationship into a hard-nosed bargaining game, Mr. Byers says. Trump will cause a greater degree of divergence, and that certainly has Canadians pulling together, not against the United States, but against the Trump administration. Not all sound such an optimistic notes for the future of the relationships, however. In a commentary in the Globe and Mail, Laura Dawson, the director of the Canada Institute at the Wilson Center in Washington, recalls the words of former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien days after 9/11, when he declared that Canada would stand behind the U.S. because the friendship has no limit. Or does it, she asks in the piece. Looking back on September 14, 2001, I wonder whether the Canadians will ever again feel the same sense of solidarity with the United States. Will our flags ever overlap as proudly and easily as they did then? Mr. Adams of the Environics Institute reaches back even further to the oft-cited words of former President John F. Kennedy, who defined the Canadian-American alliance in Ottawa in 1961. Quote, "Geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. Those whom nature has so joined, let no man put asunder. What unites us is far greater than what divides us. Many Canadians hope Kennedy's words will endure the political disruption from Washington nearly 60 years later. But today, they feel less an ally and more like the, quote, little sister, as Adams puts it. We'll feel badly, we might cry, but I don't know what we can do. Our only authority is moral authority. And this article, again, was written by Sarah Miller Lana, a staff writer at the Monitor. Moving on to our third article, still in the World section. This headline reads, Afghan experts condemn U.S. threats against international court. This article is by Kathy Gannon of the Associated Press, and it's dated September 12, 2018. Afghan rights workers warned Tuesday that a blistering U.S. attack on the International Criminal Court investigating war crime allegations will strengthen a climate of impunity in Afghanistan, prolong the war, and embolden those committing acts of violence. In a speech Monday, U.S. National Security Advisor John Bolton said Washington would not cooperate with the Hague-based court and threatened it with sanctions, saying it put U.S. sovereignty and national security at risk. The CIA and U.S. forces have been accused of committing war crimes in Afghanistan. Quote, it's very unfortunate because delivering justice to victims will help to facilitate the peace process in Afghanistan, said Simar Samar, head of Afghanistan's Human Rights Commission. Justice is not a luxury, it is a basic human right. In The Hague, the ICC said it will continue to do its work undeterred despite Mr. Bolton's condemnation. The court said in a statement that it was established by a treaty supported by 123 countries. It says it prosecuted cases only when those countries failed to do so or did not do so genuinely. Afghanistan is a signatory. During a 3-month period that ended in January, the court received a staggering 1.7 million allegations of war crimes from Afghanistan, although some of those accusations involved entire villages. Still, thousands of individual statements, as well as those filed on behalf of multiple victims, were received by the ICC in The Hague. The statements were collected by organizations based in Europe and Afghanistan. Bolton's speech came as an ICC judge was expected to announce a decision soon on a request from prosecutors to formally open an investigation into allegations of war crimes committed by Afghan National Security Forces, Taliban, Haqqani Network militants, and U.S. forces and intelligence officials in Afghanistan since May 2003. While Bolton's speech was shocking in many parts, Washington was not expected to embrace the investigation, said Amal Nasser, permanent representative of the International Federation of Human Rights to the ICC. Still, quote, the ICC prosecutor has not hesitated before in demonstrating that it would prosecute major powers, end quote, as Nasser said. I think what the U.S. is promoting is a sense of the righteousness and being above the law, she said in an email interview, noting the ICC has yet to decide whether there will be an investigation or its scope. The 181-page prosecution request, dated November 2017, said, quote, information available provides a reasonable basis to believe that members of the United States of America Armed Forces and members of the Central Intelligence Agency committed acts of torture, cruel treatment, outrage upon personal dignity, rape, and sexual violence against conflict-related detainees in Afghanistan and other locations, principally in the 2003-2004 period. Washington's unequivocal rejection of the court seems likely to embolden Afghanistan's U.S.-backed government, which refused Tuesday to respond directly to Bolton's outburst, but similarly dismissed war crimes allegations against Afghan National Security Forces as well as its intelligence agency. President Ashraf Ghani's deputy spokesman Shah Hussein Murtazawi, said the Taliban, the Islamic State group affiliates, and as many as 21 other anti-government groups have committed war crimes. He dismissed allegations against Afghan security forces, saying, "Government forces are always trying to save the people. It is the insurgents who are the killers of civilians." The prosecutor's request says there is, quote, "a reasonable basis to believe that members of the Afghan National Security Forces, in particular members of the National Directorate for Security and the Afghan National Police, have engaged in systemic patterns of torture and cruel treatment of conflict-related detainees in Afghan detention facilities, including acts of sexual violence," end quote. For human rights activists in Afghanistan, Bolton's assault dealt a punishing blow to their efforts to end a culture of impunity that has hampered efforts to bring those who committed crimes to justice. The solution to put an end to war by making everyone accountable, whether it is the Taliban or Haqqani network, or whether it is the Americans or the Afghan army or Afghan government, says Eshan Kwan of the Kabul-based Transitional Justice Coordination Group, which represents 26 organizations working in Afghanistan. The coordination group helped many who wanted to file a claim with the International Court. Victims need to see justice done if they are to begin to heal, Mr. Kwan says. He adds that some insurgents turned to the Taliban after being detained, tortured, and released. Their fight is more about revenge than ideology, he said. These people will perhaps stop fighting if they feel they have justice, Kwan said. Dr. Samar says rights groups cannot dispense justice. There is a difference between a human rights defender and a judge, thus the need for the ICC, she said in a telephone interview. My concern is that to deny justice is to deny a basic human right and human dignity. Again, this story was reported by the Associated Press and written by Kathy Gannon of the Associated Press, with additional help from AP writers Amir Shah in Kabul, Afghanistan, and Michael Corder in The Hague. All right, we're going to move on to the USA section now. Our first headline reads, "As trade war heats up, Trump's ag chief attempts to calm farmers." This article was written by Mark Weintraub of Reuters, dated September 13th. And the headline again, as trade war heats up, Trump's ag chief attempts to calm farmers. Breaking off from a tour of dairy operations on a farm in upstate New York, U.S. Agriculture Secretary Sonny Perdue tramps across a muddy path to take a sample of sweet corn from an adjacent field. With a wide smile, he shucks the ear and takes a bite, then passes it around to others in the crowd before getting back to his mission, selling farmers on the merits of President Trump's trade war. The grandfather, known as Secretary Sonny on Instagram and Twitter, has racked up thousands of miles visiting 42 states on a goodwill tour trying to shore up support among farmers who heavily supported Mr. Trump in 2016, but now see their livelihood threatened after losing much of the massive Chinese market for staple crops such as soybeans, pork, and sorghum. A former Georgia governor and veterinarian whose family farmed about 1,000 acres, Mr. Perdue has kept a low profile in volatile Washington, but served as a kind of ambassador for Trump across broad swaths of rural America. While many farmers remain loyal to the president, they have urged him and congressional Republicans to resolve the trade disputes with China, Europe, Canada, and Mexico quickly, as the commodity prices and exports plummet. Some have worked to maintain relationships with Chinese importers behind the scenes. Others are downright angry, questioning the protectionist policies and criticizing the administration's recently announced subsidy package for farmers meant to help soften the blow of retaliatory Chinese tariffs. Trade, not aid, has become a rallying cry. The need for trade aid and relief is just a result of this administration's trade policies, says Pam Johnson, who has been farming corn and soybeans in Iowa for more than 4 decades. Trump's critics in farm country also wonder why the $6.1 billion farm aid package announced by Perdue and his deputies on August 27th fell short of the $12 billion promised in July. Perdue says additional payments will be evaluated. The secretary aims to mollify such critics and rally supporters just as the Republicans face high-stakes midterm elections this fall against Democrats trying to retake control of the U.S. House and Senate. He has appeared at farms with local Republican candidates. Perdue tells farmers the trade dispute with China, normally the top buyer of U.S. soybeans, the nation's most valuable agricultural export, is a short-term sacrifice needed to gain better long-term trade deals. An Air Force veteran, the 71-year-old agriculture secretary, says farmers are patriots who are willing to do their part to ensure that the United States gets a fair deal in global trade, an argument that gets mixed reviews. I don't know what patriotism has to do with losing money, says Gary Lynch, who raises hogs in Iowa. And yet Mr. Lynch said he continues to support Perdue and the administration. He knows the business. He knows ag, Lynch said after participating in a roundtable discussion with the secretary in Iowa. He knows the game. Farmers in upstate New York seemed reassured by Perdue's easy manner and rural roots, laughing as he spun tales about getting hit in the face with cow's tails during the early morning milking. His political message connected with farmers such as Tony Amy, a 55-year-old who grows fruits and vegetables on 300 acres in Baldwinsville, New York. I know it is sort of hard to take that on the chin, but it is about time these trade balances get leveled out a bit, says Mr. Emmy, who saw Perdue at a dairy farm in Cortland, New York. We are just getting taken advantage of way too much. Some farm industry advocates have long railed against the North American Free Trade Agreement, which Trump has relentlessly targeted. Florida tomato producers contend the deal has allowed Mexico to flood the U.S. with cheap imports, while U.S. dairy farmers have fought against Canadian import tariffs. But most U.S. agriculture groups argue that farmers rely heavily on trade deals and have grown increasingly fearful about losing market access as the trade war has escalated. Washington imposed tariffs on $34 billion worth of a wide range of Chinese imports on July 6, and Beijing immediately retaliated on an equal amount of goods, focusing on autos and agricultural products. The Trump administration has accused China of targeting farmers in order to punish regions that favored the president in 2016. Chinese soy importers have since quickly retreated from the U.S. market and aim to drastically cut back on purchases of U.S. soybeans. Some U.S. farmers are starting to worry that U.S. aid won't be enough to get them through a prolonged dispute. Trump, Perdue reassures, won't allow farmers to be bullied and pressured and bear the brunt of what we believe to be unfair retaliation against agriculture, Perdue said during a recent farm tour of what he constantly referred to as the real New York, in a dig at New York City, Trump's hometown. Perdue, who famously led a vigil in 2007 on the steps of the Georgia state capitol to pray for rain, often travels in a tan and brown camper van, deploying his Southern charm as the first agriculture secretary from the South since the early Clinton administration. Jim Hefner, an Ohio farmer who saw Perdue speak in April, said his heavy travel schedule shows that Perdue is invested in farm country. He is here, there, and everywhere, Mr. Hefner said. At least he's not staying in Washington. Perdue is moving his department's economic research service away from the nation's capital to help recruit employees closer to the farm sector. A new location has not been determined. Although Perdue is a staunch critic of China, frequently mentioning several legal cases of Chinese nationals stealing genetically engineered seeds, he has advocated for free trade policies in the past. He earned points early in the Trump administration with the agriculture community for defending NAFTA, even as Trump attacked it. Trump told Reuters in an April 2017 interview he had previously been psyched to terminate NAFTA, but had changed his mind. Several agriculture lobby groups in Washington said at the time that the newly appointed Perdue had dissuaded the president from withdrawing in a one-on-one Oval Office meeting. Perdue was armed with a map that showed the importance of the trade pact to states critical to the president's 2016 electoral victory, the group said. Perdue praised Trump's announcement of a newly negotiated deal with Mexico in late August and said it, quote, validates the president's approach to bringing other nations to the negotiating table, quote, in a recent phone call with reporters. After more than a year of talks, Canada and the U.S. are still trying to resolve differences over NAFTA. Scott Gleason, a dairy farmer from Lisle, New York, with 1,200 cattle, said that while he appreciates that Perdue was reaching out to farmers, he worries the producers would be irreparably damaged while they wait for the trade war to end. Even if your voice is being heard, he said, politics is too slow. And this story, again, was reported by Reuters and was written by Mark Weintraub of Reuters. Moving on to our second headline in the USA section, this one is Puerto Rican evacuees search for housing before hotel vouchers expire. This article is by Mike Schneider and Alana Durkin-Richer of the Associated Press, and it's dated September 13th. Like many Puerto Ricans who fled to the mainland after Hurricane Maria, Jose Santiago has been scrambling to find a place to live. The federal vouchers that pay for his hotel room near the Orlando airport expire at checkout time Friday. He has visited apartment complexes, but his name gets put on waiting lists. He has applied for assistance for apartment housing from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, but it won't give him any money unless he has a lease. And he can't sign a lease without money for a deposit and first and last month's rent. Mr. Santiago can afford to pay only $500 to $800 a month with his job driving cars for an auction house. At this point, he's ready to just rent a room to put a roof over his head. At that amount, it's difficult, Santiago, whose tidy hotel room has a cooking range and refrigerator, said in Spanish. It's not impossible, but it's very difficult. The clock began ticking late last month for hundreds of Puerto Rican evacuees who rely on federal assistance to pay for hotel rooms. A federal judge in Massachusetts set Friday as the deadline for the vouchers to end after denying an effort to force FEMA to continue the program. The ruling by U.S. District Judge Timothy Hillman, who expressed anguish over his decision, ended almost 3 months of legal challenges and extensions. As of Tuesday, there were more than 600 families using vouchers on the mainland, more than half of those families in Florida. Almost 400 families were using the vouchers on the island. The judge's decision is forcing Idalis Fernandez to split up her family. Her husband and 2-year-old son Adrian are heading back to Puerto Rico, where family members can watch the boy, and her husband has a job lined up. She is staying in Florida, where she has work as a line cook at Walt Disney World, and where the couple's oldest son, 11-year-old Alexander, is doing well in school. Finding an apartment has been difficult, she said, since many rental companies require that she earn 3 times her monthly rent. I have nothing in Puerto Rico. At least I can stay here and work, Ms. Fernandez said in Spanish, as she held Adrian outside a motel in Orlando's tourist district. FEMA hasn't done enough for the evacuees, forcing local governments and organizations to step up, advocates say. Now, the location the families choose in a moment of deep urgency and disaster is affecting their ability to find housing. This is exactly what we were trying to avoid, says Natasha Licia Orabanan, a lawyer with Latino Justice, PRLDEF, which brought the lawsuit against FEMA. FEMA, amid preparations for Hurricane Florence to hit the mid-Atlantic, didn't respond to an email this week seeking comment, but the agency has said it has provided a variety of housing options for people left homeless by Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico head-on nearly a year ago. It has also dismissed suggestions that the evacuees were being treated differently from those displaced by hurricanes in Texas and Florida last year. FEMA said in a court filing last month that Puerto Rico has received $3.9 billion in assistance for Hurricane Maria, compared with $2.4 billion for Texas following Hurricane Harvey and $1.1 billion for Florida following Hurricane Irma. In Central Florida, the local United Way is offering up to $5,000 toward security deposits for some families. In New York City, more than 540 Puerto Rican evacuees are already in the city shelter system, and 30 other families may end up there after their hotel vouchers end. Massachusetts, the state with the second largest number of evacuee families after Florida, will allow families with children and people with medical conditions to remain in hotels temporarily on the state's dime, said Gina Platanino, an attorney with the Central West Justice System. The state will also provide some housing assistance for certain families to help them move into more permanent homes, she said. But more than 24 households in Massachusetts who don't qualify for the state program will become homeless Friday, Platanino says. U.S. Representative Darren Soto, whose staffers held office hours at 3 Central Florida hotels this week to assist evacuees, put the blame on President Trump and a Republican-dominated Congress that did not pass supplemental disaster relief assistance. President Trump to this day has not acknowledged not only the lack of resources and slow response time, but the continued issues in Puerto Rico, says Representative Soto, a Democrat whose district covers a part of Metro Orlando. It didn't have to be this way. Mr. Trump this week called the response to Hurricane Maria an incredible unsung success and said his administration did an underappreciated great job. Puerto Rico's governor last month raised the U.S. territory's official death toll for Maria from 64 to 2,975. On Thursday, Trump, without citing evidence, said that number was wrong and called it a plot by Democrats to make him look bad. This story, again, was reported by the Associated Press and written by Mike Schneider and Alana Durkin-Richer of the Associated Press. Our next article from the USA section has a headline that reads, Karen Pence looks to lessen the burden on military spouses. This article is by Darlene Superville of the Associated Press, dated September 13th, 2018. Being married to the vice president has its privileges. Now people take my phone calls, Karen Pence told the Associated Press in an interview. These days, Vice President Mike Pence's wife is using her new cachet to call around on behalf of military spouses, looking to help them overcome the challenges that come from being wed to active duty service members. One example is getting states to accept out-of-state professional licenses instead of making spouses get new licenses every time they have to relocate. Mrs. Pence sees these spousal challenges as key to military readiness. Unhappy spouses lead to unhappy service members who eventually will quit. Pence planned to address the issue in a speech Thursday at Fort Carson, Colorado, that will mark the beginning of a campaign to elevate, encourage, and thank military spouses. They are so strong and so capable and so willing to take on the extra struggle of being a military spouse, she told the AP. Pence's effort is reminiscent of Joining Forces, an initiative to promote military families led by former First Lady Michelle Obama and Jill Biden, the wife of former Vice President Joe Biden. Pence says Joining Forces made a lot of progress for military spouses in making states aware of licensing issues, which prompted legislative changes. But A recent study by the University of Minnesota found that while state laws have been updated, information provided by occupational boards is sometimes lacking. Some applications omitted questions about military status, while some websites had no information about the transfer process for military spouses, the study found. It's where Pence wants to use her influence, while staying mindful of the relatively short amount of time she has to make a difference. These things take time. Nobody elected me. Nobody voted for me. They don't want me writing policy, and I don't intend to, she said. But what I do know I could do is I can speak to as many spouses as possible and encourage them and uplift them and connect them. Pence, who has a son in Marine flight school and a daughter-in-law in graduate school, says she wants to be a voice for military spouses. They're such professionals, and we all just want to do what we can in this short window of time to make a difference, she adds. Maybe it's just one thing that we can do, but we want to do what we can now that we have people who, will take our call. Pence has participated in numerous discussions with spouses from all branches of the U.S. military in the nearly 2 years since she assumed her new role, both around the U.S. and in other parts of the world. She and the vice president have lived in 14 homes during their 33-year marriage, so she gets it. Pence also plans to highlight a separate issue Thursday, helping kids in military families cope with having a deployed parent. 3 infantry brigades, a field hospital, and a special operations unit, all from Fort Carson, are currently deployed. A 4th brigade is expected to ship out later this year. She'll help hand out 100 comfort kits geared to kids age 6 to 12 that include an animated DVD, a guided journal, postcards, and a teddy bear, among other items. She and the spouses of nearly 30 members of Congress assembled 500 of the kits last week at the Vice President's home. This story was reported by the Associated Press and written by Darlene Superville. Moving on to our next headline, still in the USA section, it reads, Why Good Economic Numbers Aren't Giving Trump a Boost in the Polls. This is by Peter Greer, who is a staff writer at the Monitor, and it's dated September 12th. Here are some numbers that are good, 4.2 and 3.9. The first is the growth in U.S. gross domestic product for the second quarter of 2018 at an annualized rate. The second is the unemployment rate for August. Both are evidence of a really, really strong economy, though they're not as historically unique as President Trump sometimes boasts. Here are some numbers that are bad, 39.8 and 82. The former, that would be 39.8, is the percentage of Americans who approve of the job Mr. Trump is doing, according to an average of major polls at the time of this writing. That's low. The latter is the percentage chance that Democrats will win control of the House of Representatives in November's midterm elections, and that number was 82. That's high, uncomfortably so if you're an elected Republican lawmaker. Both of these are from the data journalism site 538. So here's the question. Why isn't the demonstrably excellent economy making Trump more popular? Does this mean the famous adage about American politics, it's the economy, stupid, is no longer true? Well, we can't really tell how the economy is affecting Trump's numbers, for one thing. It could be keeping them higher than they otherwise would be. And the data shows, quote, it's the economy, end quote, remains a reliable guide to the political fortunes of presidents in the modern era. Except when it isn't. Let's step back a bit and try to put Trump's numbers in a historical context. We'll use the unemployment rate since it's a simple number. It's good for Trump, and it correlates pretty well with presidential approval ratings over time, for the most part. The current rate is 3.9%, as we noted above. When it hit that level for other presidents, what was their approval rating? Philip Klinkner, a political scientist at Hamilton College, tweeted out some numbers on this recently. Dwight Eisenhower had a 68% approval rating when the economy was humming along with only 3.9% jobless in September of 1956. Richard Nixon had a 63% approval rating when it reached that level in January 1970. Bill Clinton's approval rating was 58% positive when unemployment was 3.9% in October 2000. Those ratings were all a lot better than Trump's current number. But then there's LBJ. In November of 1967, U.S. employment was 3.7%, and Lyndon Johnson's approval was 42%. That's higher than Trump's current number, but barely. What was LBJ's problem? External shocks. The deadly slog of the war in Vietnam dominated front pages. Riots were burning out the core of major U.S. cities. Some white voters disapproved of the administration's push for civil rights. At times, Washington seemed to be losing control of the country, or at least to be out of touch. Johnson's job approval peaked at around 80% when he took office following JFK's assassination, but then basically began a years-long slide, bottoming out at 35% in August of 1968. In Trump's case, the external shock is arguably Trump himself. Republicans approve of Trump's personality and actions in office, seeing him as a truth-teller who makes liberals and mainstream news reporters uncomfortable and who is taking steps to do what the country has long needed. Many also believe that media aren't covering positive news enough. In the latest CNN poll, 82% of GOP respondents approved of the job the president is doing. But many independents and most Democrats view Trump as someone with little regard for the truth or the norms of democracy. The same CNN survey has his approval rating among self-described independents as 31%. Among Democrats, it's 5%. Talk about a partisan split. So, what are the implications of "it's the economy, stupid" truism? The phrase, of course, was made famous in Bill Clinton's 1992 presidential run when force of nature aide James Carville hung a sign to that effect in the campaign war room. Well, a few years ago, in the pre-Trump era, Pew Research took a thorough look at how economic numbers affect presidential approval and concluded the public response to all modern presidents has been shaped to some degree by rising or falling unemployment. But the correlation is closer when unemployment gets worse, and particularly when it gets worse precipitously. When it gets better and changes more slowly, the relationship between the measures is murkier. Political scientists still consider the economy one of the fundamentals, those underlying forces that can affect the outcome of American politics more profoundly than most actual campaigns. But Trump has clearly upended some of their calculations on this subject, as he has so many other things. And again, this article was written by Peter Greer, who is a staff writer at the Monitor. Moving on to the commentary section for a quick headline. This one reads, "The FDA's Crackdown on Teen Vaping," by the Monitor's editorial board, dated September 12th. A hallmark of the modern era is the length to which societies will go to protect their most innocent, children. On September 12th, for example, the Food and Drug Administration launched its largest coordinated enforcement action in the agency's history, aimed at the marketing and selling of e-cigarettes to teens. The FDA cited an epidemic rise in teen vaping over the past year, especially in the most popular brand, Juul, which entices young people with candy-like flavors which deliver a strong dose of nicotine. The agency's move follows similar efforts this year in the United States to safeguard children, such as investor pressure on high-tech firms to deal with excessive screen time among kids. Another example is a rush among states to prevent online sports gambling among youth. Worldwide, recent campaigns to keep children from harm are showing results. The numbers of boys and girls doing hazardous work is down more than a third since 2000, according to the International Labor Organization. And since 2014, a United Nations campaign has freed more than 100,000 child soldiers in conflict zones. Such efforts have steadily accelerated since 1989, when the UN adopted the Convention on the Rights of the Child. That pact was the most rapidly and widely ratified human treaty in history, human rights treaty in history. These successes on behalf of kids and a near universal presumption of their innocence can provide momentum to this new FDA crackdown. The agency has given makers of vaping devices 2 months to show they can keep them away from minors, and it warned more than 1,100 retailers about selling e-cigarettes to underage buyers. The FDA's core message: children must first be protected before becoming addicted to nicotine, even if it means less availability of e-cigarettes for children trying to use the devices to end their tobacco habits. Excuse me. Let me read that again. Their message is must be protected from becoming addicted to nicotine, even if it means less availability of e-cigarettes for adults trying to use the devices to end their tobacco habits. The latest FDA data shows a 75% increase in e-cigarette use among high school students this year compared with 2017. Another survey shows a rise in teens adding marijuana to the vaping product. These trends make it urgent to assist children in self-regulating their behavior. The world is well on its way towards its goal with a shared and rising recognition of their innocence. And that, again, is a comment from the Monitor's editorial board. Thank you. We have to stop at this point.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod to the Berkshires.
This is volunteer reader Doug, broadcasting from Marshfield, Massachusetts. Stay tuned for more coming your way next.
WRRS Middleborough, Pittsfield, WVBF Middleborough, WDJM Framingham, WUML Lowell, WLLO Londonderry.
Coming up next on the Massachusetts Reading Network for your listening pleasure, it's the New York Times. Please stay tuned.
This is Marie reading the Friday edition of the New York Times. It is September 14. Front page news: Cuomo routs Nixon to win primary race. Governor Andrew Cuomo took a decisive step towards a third term on Thursday, quelling a liberal rebellion by turning aside the insurgent challenge of Cynthia Nixon to claim the Democratic nomination in New York. Mr. Cuomo had marshaled the support of nearly all of the state and country's most powerful Democratic brokers, elected officials, party leaders, labor unions, and wealthy real estate interests, to defeat Ms. Nixon, beating her by a 30 percentage point. The race cemented both Mr. Cuomo's standing as an unmatched force in New York politics and a merciless tactician with regard to diplomacy. Ms. Nixon had cast her first-time candidacy as a fight for the direction of the Democratic Party in New York and beyond, offering a pure brand of liberalism against Mr. Cuomo's more triangulating pragmatism, a style defined less by ideology and more by what he deemed possible. In the end, the governor's records of achievement on gun control, gay marriage, the minimum wage, paid family leave, and more, and his gargantuan fundraising advantage spoke louder than Ms. Nixon's objections over legislation he sidelined in the Byzantine corridors of Albany's capital. The race was called about 30 minutes after the polls closed, with Mr. Cuomo watching the results roll in over dinner with senior staff at the governor's mansion in Albany. Mr. Cuomo never appeared publicly after the polls closed on Thursday, letting the results speak for themselves. Ms. Nixon called to offer Mr. Cuomo a private concession before a fiery speech before her supporters in Brooklyn, where she and her two insurgent allies for statewide office, Zephyr Teachout and Julian Maine Williams, had gathered. All three lost. In the Attorney General's race, Letitia James, the New York City public advocate and Mr. Cuomo's choice, won the Democratic nomination in a four-way race, with Ms. Teachout finishing second. Should Ms. James prevail in November, she would become the first black woman ever to hold statewide office in New York. In the lieutenant governor's race, Kathy Hochul, Mr. Cuomo's running mate, fended off a challenge from Mr. Williams, a New York City councilman, winning by the narrowest margin of the three. The lone bright spot for liberal insurgents came down ballot, where Democratic challengers in state Senate contests had knocked off 6 of the 8 members of the group of rogue Democrats who had broken with the party in recent years to form a coalition with the Republicans in Albany. Mr. Cuomo's victory ensures that no Democratic governor or senator in America lost a party primary in 2018, a sign of how steep a climb Ms. Nixon, an actress and activist, had faced, even before the governor's campaign unloaded a sum close to $25 million to blanket the contest in a blizzard of television ads and glossy mailers. When others were underestimating us, he did not, Ms. Nixon said in her concession speech, and he spent accordingly. In November, Mr. Cuomo, 60, will seek to match the 3 terms that his father, Mario Cuomo, achieved as governor. He has forcefully denied any presidential ambitions of his own, saying the only way he would not serve through 2022 would be death. Mr. Cuomo himself has sought to mostly ignore Ms. Nixon in recent months, focusing repeatedly on President Trump. His campaign, meanwhile, methodically pushed to undermine Ms. Nixon's credibility in often caustic terms, tapping into the concerns of New York Democrats that an experienced governor is needed while a hostile Republican occupies the White House. The front page. On War Crimes Court, U.S. sides with despots, not allies. The Hague. In a city that symbolizes international peace and justice, the ambassador from Burundi has had a lonely job, as her government faces accusations of murder, rape, and torture. She has made the unpopular argument that the International Criminal Court should butt out. The ambassador, Vestine Nahimana, says the court is politicized, unchecked intrusion on Burundi's sovereignty. It's difficult, she said in an interview here. In a way, we've been isolated. No longer. Her critiques echo those of warlords and despots, whose arguments have long been dismissed by the West. But Burundi's position got a powerful voice of support this week from President Trump, whose national security advisor, John Bolton, declared the International Court ineffective, unaccountable, and indeed outright dangerous, and threatened sanctions against the court's prosecutors and judges who pursued cases against Americans. We can only rejoice that another country has seen the same wrong, Ms. Nahimana said. Perhaps this will be a message that the sovereignty of a country must be respected in the United States and in other countries. That's also what the White House asks. For the Trump administration, Mr. Bolton's speech was the latest example of disdain for global organizations, and in this case, taking the same side as strongmen and dictators. But for the International Criminal Court, a relatively young institution, the new White House policy of open hostility comes at a perilous time. The court, which opened in 2002, was envisioned as the world's permanent judicial body for cases of war crimes, genocide, and other crimes against humanity. But a former prosecutor has faced accusations of corruption, and the court's record has been spotty. Only 8 people have been convicted, and other cases have collapsed or been withdrawn. The most significant conviction, the war crimes case against the former Congolese vice president, was overturned because of legal errors. Nevertheless, many of America's closest allies regard the court as a symbol of international order and justice and have invested heavily in its success. Mr. Bolton's comments were seen here as a threat to the institution and an invitation to world leaders to ignore the court's authority. Front page news continued. Sistine Chapel choir leaders face an investigation. Rome. The leaders of the Sistine Chapel Choir have landed in the crosshairs of an investigation by Vatican prosecutors into possible money laundering, fraud, and embezzlement. The Vatican announced that Pope Francis had authorized an investigation into some economic administrative aspects of the choral ensemble, the world's oldest. The largest of the investigation is focusing on the choir master and the administrative director, both of whom deny any wrongdoing through their lawyers. The investigation became public on Wednesday after the Vatican Insider, an online website affiliated with the Turin daily La Stampa, wrote that the two men were suspected of siphoning money from concert tours into an Italian bank account. The money was allegedly used for personal expenses, the website wrote. The investigation, which began several months ago, was still underway, the Vatican said in a statement. Reached by telephone, the Vatican's chief prosecutor declined to comment. The episode comes as the Vatican juggles scandals on various fronts, even as investigations of the clerical sexual abuse of minors continues to cross continents. Pope Francis has come under the personal attack of traditionalists and some conservatives who think he is destroying the Church by eroding its laws. The Sistine Chapel Choir was founded over 1,500 years ago and claims to be the world's oldest singing ensemble. It consists of 20 adult professional singers and 35 boys aged between 9 and 13 who attend a special school that combines an educational curriculum with music training. Pope Gregory the Great founded the school in the 16th century. The choir has several recordings with the Deutsche Grammophon label, and its website includes a map tracking its concerts worldwide. Front page continued. Key Democratic senator refers secret letter on Kavanaugh to the FBI. Washington. The senior Democrat on the Senate Judiciary Committee referred information involving Judge Brett Kavanaugh, President Trump's nominee to the Supreme Court, to federal investigators on Thursday, but the senator declined to make public what the matter involved. Two officials familiar with the matter say the incident involved possible sexual misconduct between Judge Kavanaugh and a woman when they were both in high school. They spoke anonymously because they were not authorized to discuss the matter. Front page news. 60 Minutes staff worry over impact of tumult. For decades, the headquarters of CBS News and the offices of 60 Minutes have stood on opposite sides of a windswept block of Manhattan's West 57th Street. It was a symbolic divide as much as a physical one, and these days the gap between the two might as well be miles apart. The ouster on Wednesday of Jeff Fager, the 63-year-old 60 Minutes executive producer, after he threatened the career of a CBS reporter who was looking into harassment allegations against him, has exacerbated tensions between the House of Cronkite and its most popular, most profitable show. Populated by eminences like Steve Kroft and Leslie Stahl, the weekly news magazine prides itself on a culture of exceptionalism, with the ratings to back it up. No matter if CBS News is having a good or a bad year, and there have been plenty of bad ones, 60 Minutes performs. The people of 60 Minutes were paid more. They had longer time to work on stories. They had incredible recognition in terms of ratings and prestige. So naturally, the people in the trenches would sometimes be resentful of that, said Andrew Hayward, a former CBS News president. It was like a hit TV show that happened to be at CBS News. The show keeps its footage on a separate server, inaccessible to other CBS News employees. When the network wants to broadcast a newsworthy clip from 60 Minutes, producers must include the show's on-screen watermark, as if it were a rival station. Even the contrast in office space tells a tale. The CBS Broadcast Center is a 1950s-era hulk, lamented by some employees for its windowless rooms. 60 Minutes operates out of the sleek BMW building with panoramic views of the Hudson River. David Rhodes, the 44-year-old CBS News president who fired Mr. Fager, is virtually unknown to much of the 60 Minutes staff, which effectively operated under Mr. Fager's sole authority. Officials on both sides of the news division say Mr. Rhodes now faces a daunting task, winning over a shocked team that is worried about its future and responsible for the crown jewel in the CBS News lineup. All of this has happened days after CBS's chief executive, Leslie Moonves, stepped down while facing allegations of sexual misconduct. The 51st season of 60 Minutes premieres in a little over 2 weeks, and 2 law firms are investigating the workplace culture at CBS as well as at 60 Minutes. The front page. Express line? Nah, too slow. San Francisco. One recent afternoon, the city's newest grocery market was trying to figure out whether I would buy, steal, or leave behind a bag of white cheddar popcorn, and so was I. On its side, 27 cameras along the ceiling and a wealth of behavioral data. On my side, crippling indecision. Last week, San Francisco got its first completely automated cashier-less store, Standard Market. Shoppers who have downloaded the store's app can go into the 1,900 square foot space, grab items, and simply leave. There's no check-in gate. There's no check-out swipe. Ceiling cameras identify the shopper and the items and determine when said items leave the said shopper. Or at least that's the idea. The startup behind this operation is Standard Cognition, which has raised $11.2 million in venture capital and formed partnerships with several retail chains around the world. This first market is a prototype to showcase the technology and work on the bugs. The ambitious goal is to add the tech in 100 stores a day, each day, by 2020. 5 of the 7 founders came from the Securities and Exchange Commission, where they built artificial intelligence software to detect fraud and trade violations before starting Standard Cognition in 2017. Now these fraud experts are working to discern something equally complicated, whether I am stealing a snack. Standard Market is the latest entry in the emerging fray of retail automation, where companies are throwing cameras, sensors, and machine learning into grocery stores to replace the checkout line. In January, Amazon opened its first cashier-less Go Market in Seattle to the public. It has since opened more of the stores. In China, experiments in cashier-less stores abound, using radio frequency identification tags and a self-checkout process that involves scanning a quick response code or your face. Standard Cognition's approach is different. It relies exclusively on the ceiling cameras and artificial intelligence software to figure out what you are buying. The cameras document shoppers' movements, speed, stride length, and gaze. The store knows when I glance at a poster and for how long. It knows if I slowed down, grabbed a chocolate bar and put it back. It knows if my body is facing the dried mangoes but my face is set on the popcorn. And it knows, or is trying to know, when I am planning to steal. The goal is to predict and prevent shoplifting, because unlike Amazon's ghost stores, which have a subway turnstile-like gate for entry and exit, Standard Market has an open door and the path is clear. We learn behaviors of what it looks like to leave, said Michael Sushwal, Standard Cognition's co-founder and chief operating officer. Trajectory, gaze, and speed are especially useful for detecting theft, he added. If they're going to steal, their gait is larger, and they're looking at the door. Once the system decides it has detected potential theft behavior, a store attendant will get a text and walk over for a polite conversation, he said. Predicting theft requires a lot of data about shoppers, much of which does not exist yet, or at least no one is willing to give it to us, he said. So for a few days before Standard Market opened, Standard Cognition hired 100 actors to shop there for 4 hours. In Japan, the team has worked with a convenience store chain whose name it has not disclosed in a very useful data collection effort. Standard Cognition said that unlike facial recognition, it did not collect biometric information, a possibility that has troubled privacy experts watching the technology evolve. The growth of cashier-less technology could hurt the American labor force. There are nearly 5 million retail sales workers in America. But as Mr. Susswall has pitched Standard Cognition's technology, he said, he has found that most shop owners are not looking to replace workers. Instead, they want their workers wandering the stores more in hopes of luring shoppers back into brick-and-mortar retail. They all talk about new services, making shopping more fun, making it worthwhile to shop offline, he said. And they talk about data. While a store owner can look at receipts to see who bought a generic ketchup, cashier-less technology can help tell if the shopper first picked up a Heinz bottle and how long he or she looked at it. Basically, now an owner can see what a customer did not buy. On a recent Friday, a line stretched down the street from Standard Market as a bouncer at the door took in one shopper at a time for the automated experience. The store is in San Francisco's gentrifying mid-market neighborhood between Shanti Eatery, a Pakistani restaurant, and Huckleberry Bicycles, a high-end bike shop. People outside were downloading the app and typing in their credit card numbers. Walking out was Yoshita Shashi, 32, who works nearby in finance. A receipt popped up on his phone. It said he had bought noodles and Kraft macaroni and cheese, except he had not bought the macaroni and cheese. I was playing with it, but I didn't take it out, he said, smiling at his win over the tech. The bouncer gave him a refund. Inside, Rebecca Schiffman, 28, was working the floor. She had been an employee at Whole Foods when the Standard Cognition team recruited her. She liked the idea of getting out from behind the cash register and said she was unfazed about having to intervene with potential shoplifters. I used to do it all the time anyway, she said. The front page. Protest, stroke by stroke. It will be a happy day when racial harmony rules in this land, but that day's not coming any time soon. Who could have guessed in the 1960s, when civil rights became law, that a new century would bring white supremacy tiki torching out of the closet and turn the idea that Black Lives Matter, so beyond the obvious, into a desperate battle cry? Actually, African Americans could have seen such things coming. No citizens know the national narrative and its implacable racism better than they do. and no artists have responded to that history that won't go away more powerfully than black artists. More than 60 of them appear in the traveling show called Soul of a Nation, Art in the Age of Black Power, now at the Brooklyn Museum, in a display filling 2 floors of special exhibition space with work that functions in its time as seismic detectors, political persuaders, and defensive weapons. This exhibit, which originated at the Tate Modern in London, asks basic questions about art. What's its purpose? To deliver a message? Cause a ruckus? Stand there looking pretty? And who's it for? The knowledgeable few? The wide public? These questions were in the air at the time much of this art was being made, beginning in the early 1960s, when 15 African-American artists who called themselves the Spiral Group gathered in New York City. Their work opens the show on the museum's 5th floor. International news. Philippines scrambles as typhoon bears down. Manila. Thousands of people in the path of a powerful typhoon began evacuating their homes in the northern part of the Philippines on Thursday as officials scrambled to prepare for what could be a devastating storm. Typhoon Mangkhut, with winds measuring up to 173 miles per hour, is expected to make landfall on Saturday in northern Luzon, the country's largest and most populous island. The region is home to 4 million people. The Philippines Defense Chief Ricardo Jalad briefed top officials, including President Duarte, and said that government agencies were positioning emergency response teams, food, equipment, and medical supplies in the areas likely to be affected. Officials also were setting up evacuation centers, many of them in schools, and encouraging the elderly, children, and other vulnerable people to take shelter. Airports were closed as well. International. Australian 9 is chided for her anthem protest. Sydney, Australia. A 9-year-old Australian schoolgirl who refused to stand for the singing of the national anthem has stirred a nationwide debate, said Thursday that she would continue to protest the song she said was racist, even if it meant being kicked out of school. The girl, Harper Nielsen, was sent to detention and threatened with suspension from her Brisbane primary school last week after sitting through a school-wide rendition of Advance Australia Fair, the national anthem, she said. News of her protest quickly went viral, leading to condemnations by conservative politicians and a national conversation about race and free speech. The girls' protest, which echoed those of American football players who have knelt at games during the playing of the Star-Spangled Banner, made headlines in the same week that a national newspaper printed a cartoon depicting the tennis player Serena Williams with exaggerated lips. That cartoon, like Harper's protest, further revealed an historic and racially tinged battle line in the country's culture wars. I think that everyone should be able to express their opinion, Harper said in an interview. Even if you're small, you can do big things. Harper said she was protesting one word in the anthem's second line, young. Australians all let us rejoice, so the song goes, for we are young and free. Many Indigenous Australians say the depiction of the country as new or a young nation diminishes the history of their ancestors who inhabited the continent for 10,000s of years. Australia's Aborigine and Straits Islander communities have routinely argued that many aspects of national civic life erase their history, including the anthem and Australia Day, which celebrates the arrival of the first British settlers. I thought about what it would be like to be an Aboriginal person in that situation, and I guess that helped me, Harper, who is white, said of her refusal to stand. They might feel left out. They might feel upset, sad. Her father, Mark Nielsen, said that a family conversation this year about the treatment of Indigenous Australians first got Harper, a fourth grader at Kenmore South State School in Brisbane, thinking about the anthem. Anyone who knows Harper knows she's not a kid who can be brainwashed. She's a very strong-minded and strong-willed young person, he said. He is an associate professor of psychology at the University of Queensland. Some conservative politicians condemned Harper's parents. Others threatened the child with physical violence or resorted to calling her names. What the hell is going on? I'm angry about this, Pauline Hanson, the founder of a white right-wing political party, said in a video posted to Twitter. Here we have a kid and she's being brainwashed, and I tell you what, I'd give her a kick up the backside. A state politician from the Liberal National Party said on Twitter that Harper's parents were using the child as a political pawn. Refusing to stand disrespects our country and our veterans, he wrote. Suspension should follow if she continues to act like a brat. Members of the Indigenous community, however, applauded the girl and praised her parents. Editorials. The Catholic Church's unholy stain. Pope Francis has summoned senior bishops from around the world for the first global gathering of Roman Catholic leaders to address the crisis of clerical pedophilia. The action is long overdue, and the outcome cannot be yet more apologies and pledges of better behavior. The unending revelations of clerical sexual abuse and cover-ups demand radical, public, convincing, systematic change. The latest barrage of revelations and developments, including a gut-wrenching report by a grand jury in Pennsylvania detailing 7 decades of sexual abuse of at least 1,000 children and possibly thousands more by more than 300 Catholic priests, has left no question that Pope Francis's legacy will be decided by how he confronts this crisis. It is devouring the Roman Church, erasing trust in its hierarchies, dismaying the faithful, and blackening its image. To be meaningful, any further response must include openly addressing allegations that the Pope himself was party to a cover-up. The president of the United States Conference of Catholic Bishops, Cardinal Daniel DiNardo, met with the Pope on Thursday to demand a full investigation into how the former Bishop of Washington, Theodore McCarrick, rose to high rank despite a long and apparently well-known history of sexual predation. As if to underscore the importance of the meeting, it coincided with an announcement that Pope Francis has accepted the resignation of a bishop in West Virginia, Michael Bransfield, and ordered an investigation into allegations that he had sexually harassed adults. The current Archbishop of Washington, Cardinal Donald Wuerl, was also en route to the Vatican to discuss his own possible resignation over a former posting in Pittsburgh. The crisis has been further complicated by a scathing public letter from a former Vatican envoy to the United States, Archbishop Carlo Maria Viagno, accusing Francis of lifting sanctions against Cardinal McCarrick. The accusations are tainted by his open hostility to Pope Francis and his bigoted views that homosexuality is at the root of the sexual abuse. Editorials. For Mr. Trump, he's the victim in Puerto Rico. If you've stopped being surprised by the flagrancy of President Trump's deceptions, you are not alone. Yet the president's efforts on Thursday to deny the nearly 3,000 American lives lost in Puerto Rico in the aftermath of Hurricane Maria last year, and to accuse Democrats of inflating the death tolls for political gain, should amaze even the most jaundiced Trump watcher. Mr. Trump delivered his latest bit of mendacity with a 1-2 presidential Twitter punch. 3,000 people did not die in the 2 hurricanes that hit Puerto Rico. When I left the island after the storm had hit, they had anywhere from 6 to 18 deaths. As time went by, it did not go up by much. Then a long time after, they started reporting really large numbers like 3,000. This was done by the Democrats in order to make me look as bad as possible when I was successfully raising billions of dollars to help rebuild Puerto Rico. If a person died for any reason, like old age, just add them onto the list. Bad politics. I love Puerto Rico. For most presidents, thousands of dead Americans would be a cause for grief. For Mr. Trump, they are evidence only of his victimhood. On Wednesday, even as Hurricane Florence bore down on the Carolinas, there he was, whining on Twitter that his team had done an unprecedented great job in Puerto Rico, even though an inaccessible island with very poor electricity and a totally incompetent mayor of San Juan. Unsurprisingly, the mayor of San Juan, Mr. Cruz, took exception to the president's boasting, tweeted, "This is what denial following neglect looks like. Mr. Prez, in the real world, people died on your watch. Your lack of respect is appalling." Ms. Cruz was joined in her anguish by other Puerto Rican officials, Republicans in Florida and Democrats in Congress, none of whom share Mr. Trump's rosy assessment of his disaster response, nor for that matter do a majority of Puerto Ricans, more than half of whom recently rated Mr. Trump's response poor, with a quarter rating it as only fair. To be sure, the recovery effort after a slow start wound up being substantial, and Puerto Rico's shoddy infrastructure was one of many extenuating challenges. Even so, there is little question that things could have been handled much better. Mr. Trump's memorable chucking of paper towels at devastated islanders notwithstanding. Even the Federal Emergency Management Agency and the General Government Accountability Office have found as much. Certainly it must have been vexing, perhaps even confusing, for Mr. Trump last month when the storm's death toll was revised sharply upward from 64 people to 2,975. This shift was not a result of partisan trickery, but of the preliminary findings of a study by the Milken Institute School of Public Health at George Washington University. The study is continuing, meaning that the numbers could shift again. Mr. Trump seems incapable of processing new information or learning from mistakes. Instead, he did what he always does, reject inconvenient data in favor of a story in which he is the hero. In the president's view, increases in the official death toll cannot possibly stem from a more comprehensive analysis. They must stem from yet another conspiracy by his political enemies. The 3,000 lives lost, in other words, are all about him. Democrats don't need to lift a finger to make him look bad. He's managing that all by his own. Editorials by Paul Krugman. Days of Fear, Years of Obstruction. Lehman Brothers failed 10 years ago. The U.S. economy was already in a recession, but Lehman's fall and the chaos that followed sent it off a cliff. 6.5 million jobs would be lost over the next year. It was a terrifying time. Still, we didn't experience a full replay of the Great Depression, and some have argued that the system worked, in a sense that policymakers did what was needed to avoid catastrophe. But this is only half right. We avoided utter disaster, but nonetheless experienced a huge, sustained unemployment slump, one that inflicted immense human and economic cost, and may well have helped set the stage for our current constitutional crisis. Why did the slump go on for so long? There are multiple answers, but the most important factor was politics. Cynical, bad faith, obstructionism on the part of the Republican Party. One crucial point I still don't think is widely understood is that, scary and damaging though it was, the financial crisis, the disruption of credit markets that followed Lehman's collapse, was quite brief. Measures of financial stress, which include things like interest rate, spreads on risky assets, spiked for a few months but quickly returned to normal. The purely financial aspect of the crisis was basically over by the summer of 2009. But the broader economic crisis went on much longer. Unemployment rose to almost 10%, then came down with painful slowness. It didn't get back to 5% until 7 years after Lehman's fall. Why didn't the rapid financial recovery lead to rapid economic recovery? At a basic level, the answer is that the financial crisis was only one symptom of a bigger problem, the collapse of a gigantic housing bubble. The bursting bubble exerted a powerful downdraft on the economy, both because it led to a plunge in residential investment and because it was a huge hit to household wealth, which reduced consumer spending. What the crisis called for then were policies to boost spending, to offset the effects of the housing bust. But the normal response, cutting interest rates, wasn't available because rates were almost near zero. What we needed instead was a financial and fiscal stimulus, increased government outlays, and tax cuts for lower and middle income families who would be likely to spend. We did indeed get substantial stimulus, but it wasn't big enough, and even more importantly, it faded out much too fast. By 2013, the unemployment still above 7%. Government at all levels was providing barely more economic support than it had in 2007, when the housing boom was still running strong. Why did the response to a depressed economy fall short? We can debate endlessly whether the Obama administration could have gotten a bigger, more sustained stimulus through Congress. What's clear is that some officials failed to see the need for stronger policies. When Christina Romer, the administration's top economist, argued for more stimulus, Tim Geithner, the Treasury Secretary, dismissed it as sugar. Beyond that, efforts to fight unemployment had to deal with a bizarre Beltway consensus that despite high unemployment and record low interest rates, debt, not jobs, were the real problems. But most important reason to look at the Great Slump went on for so long was scorched earth Republican opposition to anything and everything that might have helped offset the fallout from the housing bust. When I say scorched earth, I am not being hyperbolic. Let's not forget that in the summer of 2011, Republicans in Congress threatened to provoke a new financial crisis by refusing to raise the debt limit. Their goal was to blackmail President Barack Obama into cutting spending at a time when unemployment was still 9% and U.S. real borrowing costs were close to zero. Now, Republicans claimed that their opposition to anything that might limit mass unemployment was driven by a deep commitment to fiscal responsibility, but this was complete hypocrisy, something that was obvious to anyone who looked at the actual content of GOP budget proposals, which gave smoke and mirrors a bad name. You had to be extremely credulous to fake GOP deficit hawkery seriously. Unfortunately, there were a lot of credulous pundits out there. Anyway, the events of the past 2 years have made the reality of what happened crystal clear. The very same politicians who piously declared that America couldn't afford to spend money supporting jobs in the face of a deep, prolonged slump just rammed through a huge, deficit-exploding tax cut for corporations and the wealthy, even though the economy is currently near full employment. No, they haven't abandoned their commitment to fiscal responsibility. They never cared about deficits in the first place. So if you want to understand why the great slump that began in 2008 went on so long, blighting so many American lives, the answer is politics. Specifically, policy failed because cynical, bad-faith Republicans were willing to sacrifice millions of jobs rather than let anything good happen to the economy while a Democrat sat in the White House. Editorials. Kara Swisher, Google's censorship scandal. This week, on the right-wing side Breitbart News, a video surfaced of one of Google's weekly TGIF meetings where employees and the leadership engage in heated debates over everything from healthier snack stations to the election of Donald Trump. Breitbart News described the 2016 video as a smoking gun because it shows the Google co-founder, Sergey Brin, telling everyone how he felt about the new leader of the free world. Spoiler, not good. Myself, as an immigrant, as a refugee, I certainly find this election deeply offensive, and I know many of you do too, he said in his flat nasal voice. He was obviously rattled, as were the other top Google executives on stage with him. I think it is a very stressful time, and it conflicts with many of our values. Conservatives who have been spreading the carnage that social media companies oppress their views, a drum Mr. Trump has himself been banging on lately, seized on that video as proof of Google's bias. But it should not have shocked anyone to find out that Mr. Brin, a Russian exile who built the quirkiest of companies on the planet, is no fan of the president. Responding to the attack on its motives, a Google spokeswoman said nothing was said at the meeting or at any other meeting to suggest that any political bias ever influences the way we build or operate our products. Blah, blah, blah. I don't mean to be cavalier, but I am astonished by the focus on this ridiculous scandal when a much more important issue concerning Google and censorship has been largely ignored by the public and by Washington. I'm talking about the fact that Google is considering re-entering the Chinese market after leaving it with a lot of righteous indignation less than a decade ago. Reports say it might once again offer a range of services, including a censored version of its flagship search engine. A Google spokeswoman told me that the controversial effort, codenamed Dragonfly, is exploratory, and that Google is not close to launching a search product in China. What's most interesting is that much of the outrage about the possibility seems to be coming from Google employees who have registered strong objections rather than from the outside. New York News. James wins Attorney General bid, a first for a black woman. Letitia James became the first black woman to win a major party statewide nomination on Thursday, easily defeating three rivals in New York's Democratic primary for Attorney General. With her win, Ms. James, 59, the New York City public advocate, has positioned herself as a prominent face of resistance to the policies of President Trump, a role that the New York Attorney General's office has embraced since Mr. Trump took office. This campaign was never really about me or any of the candidates who ran, Ms. James said in her victory speech. It was about the people, but mostly it was about that man in the White House who can't go a day without threatening our fundamental rights. Business Day. America's poor miss out on boom, census shows. In July, President Trump's Council of Economic Advisors declared that the country's 5-decade war on poverty was largely over and called it a success. On Wednesday, the Census Bureau released its 2017 annual report on the poor that offered a stark counterpoint, suggesting that the national recovery has bypassed many of the 40 million to 45 million Americans estimated to be living below the federal poverty level. While median household income rose 1.8% last year, the national poverty rate remains stubbornly high at 12.3%. That was just a slight decrease from the previous year's level of 12.7%, according to the federal government's most comprehensive annual gauge of economic hardship. Business Day. Europe, citing trade risks, projects slower growth. Frankfurt. When President Trump first provoked a trade war, the fear in Europe was that the biggest impact would be psychological. Executives would be rattled. They would postpone or cancel plans to invest in expansion. Increasingly, that is exactly what seems to be happening. European factories are producing fewer goods. Automobile experts are plunging, and surveys show that business managers around the continent are nervous. Soon, that will have a measurable impact on economic growth across the region. At least, that is what the European Central Bank expects. On Thursday, the bank lowered its projections for economic growth across the 19-nation euro area and warned that any potential escalation of the dispute, which threatens to ensnare the European automotive industry, could create further headaches. The bank's president said in a news conference that rising protectionism, vulnerabilities in emerging markets, and financial market volatility had gained more prominence. He added that the reduced forecasts were mainly due to a somewhat weaker contribution from foreign demand. He was speaking after a meeting of the central bank's rate-setting committee, which held interest rates steady on Thursday and made no changes to its monetary policy. The European Central Bank's Governing Council has outlined a plan for winding down emergency stimulus measures and shows no sign of changing course despite a plethora of new risks. Weekend Arts. 11 Diane Arbus photos will finally be shown. 11 images by Diane Arbus that have never been seen before by the public will be exhibited in the David Zwirner Gallery in New York in November, inaugurating the gallery's new collaboration with the Frankel Gallery in San Francisco in representing the Arbus estate. The photographs will appear as part of the first complete presentation of Arbus's Untitled series, the last body of work she created before her death in 1971. Untitled is composed of 65 images made at residences for the developmentally disabled from 1969 to 1971. The exhibition will open November 2. Weekend Arts. Stormy Daniels' Tell All hits shelves next month. The latest and perhaps juiciest Trump tell-all to land this year isn't from a disgruntled former White House staffer or a deeply soured investigative journalist. It's by Stephanie Clifford, better known as Stormy Daniels, the pornographic film star and unlikely feminist resistance hero who has waged a legal battle over a non-disclosure agreement designed to prevent her from talking about a sexual relationship she claims she had with Donald Trump. On Wednesday, St. Martin's Press announced that it will publish Ms. Clifford's memoir, Full Disclosure, pun likely intended, this October, just before the midterm elections. In the new release, the publisher said Ms. Clifford will tell her whole story for the first time, including how she came to be a successful actress and director in the adult film business, her alleged affair with Mr. Trump, and the events that led to the non-disclosure agreement and the behind-the-scenes attempts to intimidate her. I own my story and the choices I made, Ms. Clifford writes. They may not be the ones you would have made, but I stand by them. Full Disclosure follows other exploitative books about Mr. Trump and his administration, including Michael Wolff's bestseller, Fire and Fury, James Comey's A Higher Loyalty, Omarosa Newman's Unhinged, an insider's account of the Trump White House, and most recently Bob Woodward's Fear, Trump in the White House, which has dominated headlines with insider accounts of turmoil, instability, and paranoia inside the White House. Mr. Woodward's book became an instant blockbuster this week, selling more than 750,000 copies, and Simon & Schuster ordered a 9th printing, which will bring the number of hard copies to print to more than 1,150,000. Full disclosure could inflict further damage and is likely to put the White House on edge. The publication will bring Ms. Clifford's story back into the headlines just weeks before the contentious midterm elections and could draw new public scrutiny to her allegations about the affair and efforts by Mr. Trump and his former lawyer, Michael Cohen, to cover it up. Ms. Clifford has already spilled some of the details of the alleged affair and has given splashy interviews on 60 Minutes, Jimmy Kimmel Live, and In Vogue. But she now promises a more detailed version of events. Shortly before the 2016 election, Ms. Clifford was paid $130,000 by a shell company created by Mr. Cohen in exchange for not publicly disclosing a sexual relationship she said she had with Mr. Trump in 2006. Ms. Clifford sued earlier this year to have the agreement deemed unenforceable, arguing the contract, which Mr. Trump never signed, was illegal. She also sued the president for defamation. The scandal may pose one of the most serious legal threats to Mr. Trump's presidency. Last month, Mr. Cohen pleaded guilty to violating campaign finance laws by making the payment to Ms. Clifford and said that he did so at the direction of Mr. Trump. Weekend Arts. An oppressed daughter is driven to murder. There's something wildly freeing about the savage killings in Lizzie, a distinctly feminist take on the notorious Lizzie Borden, history's most famous, if unproven, mom-and-pop slayer. This sense of liberation derives from murders enacted with the methodical exhilaration of a jailbreak, a cathartic response to years of oppression by her miserly father, Andrew, James Sheridan, and loathed stepmother, Abby, Fiona Shaw. And when Lizzie strips naked before hacking her two tormentors to slivers, her nudity isn't simply practical. It's the repudiation of a 19th century wardrobe that has controlled women's movements as thoroughly as men did. As played with fierce conviction by Chloe Sevigny, whose longtime fascination with Borden led her to commission the script from her friend Bryce Cass, Lizzie is headstrong, wily, and possibly an epileptic. The 32-year-old society Spencer in one of Massachusetts's wealthiest families, she moves resolutely through the gloomy Borden household, every creak and groan contributing to its coffin-like atmosphere. The arrival of Bridget, Kristen Stewart, wary and watchful, a deceptively timid Irish maid, arouses Lizzie's interest, and her father's too. Twin longings that will help explain Lizzie's eventual violence and subvert a plot reeking with male power. Lizzie isn't perfect. The pacing can flag, and the lovely Kim Dickens as Lizzie's older sister barely registers. But Lizzie's intelligent and formidable control keep the melodrama grounded. Her empathy for Borden, whose fragile constitution belies a searing will, is palpable, as is the sense of inescapable peril surrounding the two female leads. When Andrew slides into Bridget's bed, her terrified face fills the frame. And when Lizzie's slimy Uncle John, a gleefully malevolent Dennis O'Hare, reminds her who will control her inheritance, his quietly menacing threats, delivered through clenched teeth, are magnified in extreme close-up. Together, Craig William McNeil's focused direction and Noah Greenberg's superb cinematography weave a suffocating cocoon around the two women. Nothing is wasted and everything has a point. The doomed, flapping pet pigeon whose blood will later be repurposed to mislead investigators. The sudden seizures that grips Lizzie during an opera, with the camera gazing down on her twitching body. Yet while the movie places us firmly in her corner, it refuses to make her an unhinged victim, laying out her cold-blooded plans with gory relish. "No one will save you from what's to come," reads an anonymous note on the Borden's doorstep before the murders. It's intended for Andrew, but could be read as a warning to any one of the characters. Lizzie might feel like an escape story, but its killer and her accomplice, locked in a furtive attachment, are still a long way from being free.
You've just listened to the reading of the New York Times. If you'd like to listen to this program again, please access it on our website at ticnetwork.org.
Thank you for listening to the Massachusetts Reading Network, a window to independent life in your community from Cape Cod.
Muy buenas tardes y bienvenidos una vez más a su programa de Audio Journal, el servicio de radiolectura del centro de Massachusetts, aquí sirviendo a personas discapacitadas visualmente o físicamente las 24 horas al día, 7 días a la semana. Somos miembro de Massachusetts Reading Network. Nuestra guía de programación es disponible en braille, así también en un folleto de letras grandes y por audio, mediante un cassette o disco compacto. Se puede obtener simplemente llamándonos al 508-797-1117. Recuerde, 508-797-1117 aquí en Worcester. Y también por correo electrónico info@audiojournal.net. Y ahora quédense en sintonía para escuchar los artículos editados de nuestro semanario local, Vocero Hispano de Massachusetts, que se nos presenta desde hoy viernes, 14 de septiembre, hasta el 20 de septiembre del 2018. Y esta es, como siempre, su servidora aquí de voluntaria en Audio Journal, Evelyn Mical González, leyendo y editando todos los viernes de 3 a 4 de la tarde los artículos de nuestro Vocero Hispano, una producción de Audio Journal. Y los titulares de esta semana que tenemos son: en la página 3, nos informa que gobernador de Puerto Rico revela preparativos para enfrentar huracanes. En la página 22, Maradona dice: no venimos a vacacionar en México. Y las noticias más grandes de portada, escrito por Alana Durkin Richer, desde Boston, demandan al gobierno de Trump por separación de familias. Y la otra noticia de portada, escrita por Jennifer Peltz, desde Washington, con homenajes sombrios, Estados Unidos recuerda a víctimas del 9/11. Estaremos leyendo acerca de estos artículos y mucho más. Quédense en sintonía. A continuación, el tiempo para su fin de semana. Y ahora entonces, el tiempo para su fin de semana, para hoy viernes, parcialmente soleado, las altas en los 71, las bajas en los 58. Para mañana sábado, soleado, la temperatura, las altas en los 74 grados y las bajas en los 59 grados. Y para el domingo, soleado, 77 grados, las altas 58 grados las mínimas. Y para el lunes, nuevamente soleado, las altas en los 76 y las bajas en los 56 grados. Y ahora entonces las noticias de portada. Varios abogados presentaron una demanda contra el gobierno de Donald Trump, exigiéndole resarcir a las familias migrantes que separó en la zona fronteriza entre Estados Unidos y México. La demanda presentada en Worcester, Massachusetts, busca crear un fondo para pagar por el tratamiento psicológico de los niños que fueron separados de sus padres por el gobierno de Trump, que había adoptado una política de tolerancia cero contra todos los que crucen la frontera ilegalmente. El gobierno agregó la querella debe responder por sus acciones y reparar el daño causado. Añadió que muchas personas sufrieron daños psicológicos y trauma emocional debido a la separación. Menciona los casos específicos de 2 familias guatemaltecas que cruzaron la frontera pidiendo asilo. Estos niños son inocentes y las autoridades federales les lastimaron simplemente con base en su raza y origen nacional. Eso lo declaró Iván Espinosa Madrigal, director ejecutivo del Comité de Abogados a favor de Derechos Humanos y Justicia Económica y uno de los abogados que presentó la demanda contra el secretario de Justicia Jeff Sessions y otros funcionarios del gobierno. Es ilegal e injusto. Estas familias deben ser recompensadas por la experiencia espeluznante que vivieron, dijo Espinosa Madrigal. El Departamento de Justicia de Estados Unidos no respondió de momento a mensajes pidiéndoles su reacción. Las autoridades migratorias separaron a más de 2,000 niños de sus padres en los primeros meses de este año. Trump promulgó luego un decreto el 20 de junio que derogó su política en medio de una condena internacional generalizada. Uno de los niños mencionados en la querella tenía 11 años de edad cuando huyó de la violencia de Guatemala para pedir asilo en Estados Unidos. Fue separado de su padre por más de un mes y temió que nunca lo volvería a ver, según la denuncia. Añade que el pequeño sigue teniendo pesadillas a veces tan aterradoras que se cae de la cama. En la demanda, los individuos son mencionados solo por sus iniciales para proteger su privacidad. El trauma que sufrieron fue duradero y seguirá afectando su salud psicológica y emocional durante años, dice la demanda. La otra noticia desde Washington. Los estadounidenses recordaron el martes con ceremonias solemnes, servicios voluntarios y un tributo presidencial a las víctimas de los atentados terroristas del 9/11 del 2001, entre ellas las que se defendieron a bordo de uno de los 4 aviones secuestrados que se utilizaron como armas en el ataque más mortífero en suelo estadounidense. El presidente Donald Trump se refirió a estas últimas personas como el momento en que Estados Unidos contraatacó. En una brumosa mañana, miles de familiares de las víctimas, sobrevivientes, rescatistas y otros acudieron a una de las ceremonias en la plaza conmemorativa donde alguna vez estuvieron las torres gemelas del World Trade Center. Trump y el vicepresidente Mike Pence se dirigieron a los otros 2 lugares donde los aviones secuestrados, un campo en Pennsylvania y el Pentágono. 17 años después de perder a su esposo, Margie Miller fue a la ceremonia en la ciudad de New York. Llegó desde su casa en los suburbios de Baldwin, como lo hace unas 10 veces al año para recordar a Joel Miller. Solo se pudieron recuperar unos cuantos fragmentos de sus restos. La ceremonia en el lugar donde se alzaban las torres gemelas del World Trade Center comenzó a las 6:46 de la mañana, la misma hora en que un avión comercial secuestrado chocó contra la torre norte en la ciudad de New York. Para mí, él está aquí. Este es mi lugar sagrado, dijo su viuda antes de que comenzara la ceremonia con un momento de silencio y el tañido de campanas. Luego los seres queridos de las víctimas comenzaron a leer los nombres de las casi 3,000 personas que murieron cuando los 4 aviones secuestrados fueron usados como armas letales. Trump y su esposa Melania participaron en una ceremonia en el monumento a las víctimas del 11 en un campo cerca de Shanksville, Pennsylvania, donde el pasado sábado se inauguró la Tower of Voices, que es una torre de las voces. Pence encabezó los actos en el Pentágono. En el campo cerca de Shanksville cayó uno de los 4 aviones secuestrados. Muchos de los 40 pasajeros y miembros de la tripulación se amotinaron frente a los secuestradores. Trump dijo que ese fue el momento en que Estados Unidos contraatacó. Dijo que los caídos tomaron el control de su destino y cambiaron el curso de la historia. Se unieron a las filas inmortales de los héroes estadounidenses, agregó Trump. Por su parte, Pence recordó el heroísmo de las fuerzas de seguridad y los civiles que repetidamente volvieron al Pentágono para rescatar a los sobrevivientes. Los terroristas esperaban quebrar nuestro espíritu y fracasaron, aseguró. Las conmemoraciones del 11S son ya rituales familiares que se centran en la lectura de los nombres de los fallecidos, pero en la llamada Zona Cero de New York. Los familiares llenan cada año el acto de mensajes personales de recuerdo, preocupación e inspiración. Casi 3,000 personas fallecieron en los ataques del 9/11, una tragedia que sigue dando forma a las políticas y la política estadounidense, además de a la vida cotidiana en lugares como aeropuertos u oficinas, incluso, aunque sea una presencia menos constante en la conciencia colectiva. Luego de 17 años, poco después del aniversario del año pasado, se produjo un claro recordatorio. Una camioneta causó 8 muertos tras un atropello en un sendero cicloturista a unas pocas manzanas del World Trade Center en pleno Halloween. En diciembre, un suicida potencial detonó una bomba de fabricación casera en un pasadizo del metro cerca de Times Square. Según las autoridades, agregaron que los sospechosos de ambos ataques estaban inspirados por el grupo extremista Estado Islámico. Y aquí en la foto vemos a miembros del cuerpo de bomberos con la bandera de Estados Unidos, policías y público en general que asistieron al acto de recordación de las víctimas. Y ahora entonces son aproximadamente las 3 de la tarde con 11 minutos. Es la hora en los estudios de Audio Journal. Y ahora en noticias locales, estudiantes del Colegio Quinsigamond Community College ayudan a personas de la tercera edad con deterioro de la memoria. Escrito por George Martin. Desde Worcester. A veces se necesita un poco de paciencia, persistencia y una palabra amable para generar impacto en la vida de alguien. Un grupo de estudiantes de la Sociedad de Quinsigamond Community College, PTK, descubrió cuán cierto era eso cuando conocieron a los residentes del oasis en Dodge Park, una casa de retiro en Worcester. A principios de este verano, los estudiantes organizaron un baile de graduación para los residentes. Ese fue el fin de más de un mes de eventos que formaron para el proyecto estudiantil Mérito en Acción. Este es un proyecto de investigación de un año que aborda una necesidad dentro de la comunidad. Está diseñado para involucrar a los estudiantes en actividades educativas que fomenten el éxito estudiantil, brindándoles oportunidades de crecimiento tanto académicos como de liderazgo. Este año, miembros del comité PTK eligieron su proyecto sobre el poder de las conexiones. La idea con este tema fue la facilidad con la que podemos dar por sentada nuestras conexiones. cuán generalizada está y a menudo cuán notoria es su ausencia. Los estudiantes decidieron investigar sobre ancianos en casas de retiro y desarrollaron un interrogante de investigación. ¿Cómo es que la interacción social entre voluntarios personal y pacientes de edad avanzada afecta en el sentimiento de soledad de los ancianos? Para encontrar la respuesta a esta pregunta, los estudiantes realizaron diversos eventos con los ancianos, incluido un día de juegos, manicures, para las damas, por supuesto, y pizza, y concluyó con un baile de graduación. Cuando comenzamos nuestros eventos en Oasis, muchos de los residentes estaban de mal humor y parecían muy deprimidos. Pero a los pocos minutos de nuestro primer evento, comenzaron a formarse vínculos y vimos un cambio drástico en las expresiones y estados de ánimo de los pacientes. Continuamos viendo mejores y mejores resultados a medida que progresaron nuestros eventos. Las conexiones se hicieron más fuertes, más ancianos interactuaban socialmente y la energía y el estado de ánimo general de ellos y el personal se volvieron más positivos. Eso dijo la estudiante de PTK, Katie Berry. Los residentes antes deprimidos y malhumorados eran casi irreconocibles por los cariñosos, agradecidos y felices que eran ahora. Mika Chalev, copropietario y administrador del Oasis en Dodge Park, dijo que los residentes en el hogar de retiro sufren de demencia y enfermedad de Alzheimer. Mencionó que el objetivo de la actividad era traer momentos de alegría a su mundo a través del programa y las visitas de los estudiantes de PTK de Quinsigamond, y esto se logró. La felicidad, alegría y diversión en el rostro de nuestros residentes fue un testimonio verídico de los beneficios del programa de graduación, dijo. Espero que podamos repetir este evento en una fecha posterior y una vez más, me gustaría agradecer a la universidad y a los estudiantes desde el fondo de mi corazón. La fiesta de graduación fue lo más destacado tanto para los residentes como para los estudiantes, que pasaron tiempo bailando con las personas mayores, compartiendo la mesa y recordando sus viejas historias. No solo causamos impacto en los residentes, sino que muchos de ellos tuvieron un impacto en los voluntarios también. Aprendí mucho sobre la compasión humana y creé vínculos fuertes que planeo seguir manteniendo. Muchos de los residentes solo necesitaban a alguien con quien hablar o incluso simplemente estar a su lado para sentirse menos solo y más feliz. Dijo la señora Berry, nunca olvidaré a las personas mayores que conocí, sus experiencias, sabiduría, compasión y humor. La fiesta de graduación fue realmente hermosa y el voluntario en Oasis ha sido una experiencia muy gratificante. 2 de los estudiantes voluntarios hicieron un vínculo tan fuerte con un estudiante de último año que van a continuar regresando y visitando la casa de retiro. A pesar de que nuestros eventos se completaron en relación con el proyecto Mérito en Acción, el consenso entre el comité de PTK es continuar regresando al Oasis en Dodge Park cada 6 semanas para continuar con esos vínculos y amistades, agregó la señora Brebeck. Y ahora entonces, en noticias regionales desde Boston, la prensa asociada reporta el gobernador Baker acepta 3 debates, el desafiante candidato demócrata quiere 5. El equipo de campaña del gobernador republicano Charlie Baker dijo el jueves que ha aceptado 3 debates para otoño con el aspirante Jay González. El candidato a gobernador del Partido Demócrata, el demócrata, había anunciado que estaba aceptando invitaciones de 5 organizaciones que buscaban realizar debates y le pidió a Baker que las aceptara también. El equipo de campaña de Baker dice que aceptó debatir los debates que serán organizados por WBZ TV, WGBH y el tercero por un consorcio de medios de comunicación que incluye The Boston Globe y otras estaciones y la Universidad de Massachusetts. No han habido noticias inmediatas sobre fechas, horarios o ubicaciones. El equipo de campaña de González estaba decepcionado de que Baker rechazara los otros debates que habían sido propuestos por los medios de Worcester y Springfield y por Telemundo Boston, dijo Kevin Reddy, el gerente de campaña del demócrata. Le debemos a los votantes la oportunidad de ver y oír nuestras visiones contrastantes y estilos de liderazgo para todo el estado, dijo González en una declaración anterior. También el equipo de Baker dijo que 22 alcaldes, 10 de los cuales son demócratas, habían respaldado la respuesta de reelección del gobernador. Entre los demócratas que apoyan a Baker sobre González estaba Dominic Sarno, de Springfield, el alcalde de la tercera ciudad más grande del estado. En un comunicado, Sarno resaltó la administración de Baker, su receptividad a las perspectivas y necesidades de los funcionarios locales y ayudó a su ciudad, donde recientemente se inauguró el primer casino de Massachusetts, a realizar mejoras en su infraestructura. Sarno apoyó a la demócrata Martha Coakley sobre Baker en la carrera del gobernador del 2014 y ahora está apoyando a Charlie Baker sobre González. Otros alcaldes que son demócratas pero que figuran como respaldo del titular republicano incluyen a Brian Arrigo de Revere, Yaciel Correira de Fall River, Stephen DiNatale de Fitchburg, Scott Galvin de Woburn, Donna Holliday de Newburyport, Daniel Rivera de Lawrence, Bill Samaras de Lowell, Brian Sullivan de Westfield y Joe Sullivan de Braintree. 7 independientes y 5 alcaldes republicanos también respaldaron a Baker, dijo el equipo de campaña. Hay 47 alcaldes en el total en Massachusetts. El alcalde de Boston, Marty Walsh, respaldó a González en una reunión de unidad democrática diciendo que el estado necesitaba un gobernador con visión audaz. González anunció previamente el apoyo de otros alcaldes, incluyendo Mark McGovern de Cambridge, David Narkewicz de Northampton e Yvonne Spicer de Framingham, la única alcalde de color del estado. Y ahora entonces, continuando con noticias nacionales, desde New Orleans, escribe Janet McConaughey. Zoológico alemán enviará su último orangután a Luisiana. Un zoológico en Alemania enviará hacia Luisiana a su último orangután, que ha comenzado a aprender un poco de inglés. Jambi, de 22 años de edad, es un orangután de Sumatra, una especie en grave peligro de extinción de los grandes monos asiáticos de pelo rojo. El ejemplar viajará 5,000 millas desde el zoológico Adventure de Hanover al zoológico Audubon de New Orleans, donde se reunirá con 3 hembras, Reese, Feliz, y Menari, hija de Feliz. Pero primero Jambi debe pasar un mes fuera de la vista del público en el zoológico de Dallas, que está autorizado por los Centros para el Control y Prevención de Enfermedades como lugar de cuarentena para primates importados, aunque el zoológico de Hanover le hizo una fiesta de despedida a Jambi el 31 de agosto, no será sino hasta esta semana en que el orangután será trasladado a Dallas, acompañado por un cuidador alemán y uno de Audubon, dijo el viernes Joel Hamilton, vicepresidente y curador general del zoológico Audubon. ¿Cómo llegará de Alemania el Jambi? Quizá no entienda bien el inglés. El personal en Hanover ha estado utilizando más órdenes en inglés para ayudarlo a entender, señaló Hamilton. Le permitirán a nuestro personal aprender algunas órdenes en alemán para que podamos continuar trabajando en la transición, agregó. Los otros 2 orangutanes del zoológico de Hanover fueron trasladados el año pasado al zoológico de Fort Worth, en Texas. Y ahora entonces desde New York, por Stephen Grooves. John Lennon es celebrado en Estados Unidos con estampilla, con un sello. John Lennon, con su emblemática melena, anteojos redondos y sonrisa, ahora decora un sello postal estadounidense. Yoko Ono y su hijo Sean Lennon estuvieron en el Parque Central de New York, en Central Park, el viernes para celebrar el lanzamiento de la estampilla o del sello del Servicio Postal de Estados Unidos en honor al ex Beatle. Cientos de fans de los Beatles se congregaron para el evento. Sean Lennon dijo que su padre hubiera estado encantado con el reconocimiento. La estampilla conmemorativa muestra una foto de Lennon tomada en el 1974 en la azotea de su edificio en Manhattan por el fotógrafo Bob Gruen, quien también habló en el evento. El sello fue diseñado a semejanza de una carátula de disco de 45 RPM. Y ahora entonces, desde Dallas, mujer cuestiona si la raza fue factor en muerte de su hijo, escrito por Ryan Tarinelli. Desde Dallas, la madre de un hombre negro que murió en su propio apartamento cuando una mujer policía de Dallas de raza blanca le disparó al presuntamente confundir la vivienda con la suya, cuestionó si su hijo todavía estaría vivo de haber sido blanco. Allison Jean, la madre de Botham Jean, de 26 años, se preguntaba si la raza fue un factor cuando la agente Amber Geiger disparó y mató a su hijo al volver a casa vistiendo su uniforme luego de concluir su turno la noche del jueves. No sabía que era blanca hasta ahora. ¿Habría sido diferente si hubiera sido un hombre blanco o hubiera reaccionado diferente?, preguntó Jean en un video del viernes transmitido por la filial de la NBC en Dallas. La policía, quien lleva 4 años en el servicio y estaba asignada a la División de Patrulla del Sureste, les dijo a los investigadores que estaba fuera de servicio la noche del jueves cuando por error entró al departamento equivocado y disparó a Botham Jean. La policía no ha dado más información de la policía. La jefe de policía de Dallas, Renee Hall, indicó el viernes que su departamento procuraría acusar a la policía de homicidio imprudencial. Sin embargo, Hall aclaró el sábado durante un panel de justicia criminal transmitido en vivo por Facebook que la división de los Rangers del Departamento de Seguridad Pública de Texas, quienes ha tomado control del caso, le pidió a su departamento postergar la emisión de una orden de arresto dado que necesitaba más tiempo para revisar la información proporcionada por la agente durante una entrevista con los investigadores. Ahora la situación está en sus manos, dijo Hall. La jefa policía reconoció que aún hay muchas interrogantes en relación al tiroteo y pidió a la población dar a los investigadores el suficiente tiempo para tener las respuestas. El Departamento de Salud Pública, que supervisa a los Texas Rangers, no respondió de momento a un mensaje telefónico del sábado en busca de un comentario. El alcalde Mike Rawlings declaró el sábado que el tiroteo es una situación muy seria para la ciudad y describió a Botham Jean como una joven profesional y un hombre de fe que era exactamente el tipo de ciudadano que queremos tener. Botham Jean, oriundo de la isla caribeña Santa Lucía, había asistido a la Universidad Harding en Arkansas, en donde con frecuencia dirigía servicios religiosos antes de graduarse en el 2016, reveló la institución en un comunicado. Ese julio empezó a trabajar para la firma de contabilidad y consultora PwC en el área de aseguramiento de riesgos. El gobierno del país Isla emitió un comunicado el viernes en el cual expresaba shock, asombro, por el homicidio y dio el pésame a la familia Jean. Añadió que los funcionarios en su embajada de Estados Unidos ofrecerían asistencia a la familia. Un abogado de la familia del joven señaló el sábado, luego de una vigilia en una iglesia en Dallas, que la orden de arresto para Geiger ya debería haberse emitido. Esta familia se siente frustrada. Esta familia está molesta, aseveró el abogado Lee Merritt. Esta familia está afligida de que la detención de la policía, no haya ocurrido aún. Decenas de personas, entre ellas la madre de Jean, estuvieron presentes el sábado en la vigilia. Allison Jean, quien tiene cargos gubernamentales en Santa Lucía, poblado donde vive y donde crió a su hijo, dijo que la muerte de Botham se siente como una pesadilla. Y ahora entonces desde Washington, reporta Calvin Woodward, ecos de Watergate en la crisis de la presidencia de Trump. Y en la foto se encuentra a Bob Woodward, que es el autor del último libro que se ha escrito sobre el presidente o sobre lo que está pasando en la Casa Blanca. Desde Washington, la Casa Blanca hierve de conspiraciones y traiciones mientras los colaboradores buscan al filtrador anónimo. El presidente se siente asediado por sus verdugos. Bob Woodward, en particular, lo vuelve loco. Hace crecer su propia versión de una lista negra de enemigos y musita en voz alta si debe despedir a su secretario de Justicia, si se debe despedir al secretario de Justicia, al fiscal especial o a los dos. Desde hace meses, el gobierno de Donald Trump y sus escándalos traen un olorcillo a Watergate, que invita a la comparación con los personajes y delitos de la época de Richard Nixon. Pero esta semana la historia no se limitó a una repetición, salió del basural hecha carne nuevamente. Ahí estaba otra vez el viejo asesor de Nixon, John Dean, declarando en el Congreso acerca de un cáncer en la presidencia. Casi cada problema de Trump tiene un paralelo con Watergate. El fiscal especial Robert Mueller dirige una investigación independiente provocada por una irrupción en el Comité Nacional Demócrata, el mismo hecho que destapó la gusanera de Watergate, aunque en este caso el robo fue digital y vinculado con el Kremlin, no con la Casa Blanca. El presidente Richard Nixon ordenó a su secretario de Justicia y luego al subsecretario que despidieran al fiscal de Watergate. Ambos se negaron y renunciaron en lo que ha pasado en la historia como la masacre del sábado por la noche, pero que no demoró por mucho tiempo la investigación ni la caída de Nixon. Trump despidió a la secretaria de Justicia en funciones y al director del FBI, James Comey, lo que dio lugar a la investigación de Mueller, que lo persigue desde hace más de un año. Algunos de los miembros de periodistas de entonces, Woodward y Carl Bernstein, quienes sacaron a la luz el robo en el Watergate, son los que enfurecen al presidente de ahora. Agente demócrata, dijo Trump sobre Woodward, idiota degenerado, dijo sobre Bernstein, quien colaboró con una nota para CNN acerca de la investigación de la injerencia rusa que según el presidente es una mentira enorme. Todos tratan de derribarme, dijo Trump, a un colaborador según el nuevo libro de Woodward llamado Fear, Miedo. El libro describe una tragicomedia en la Casa Blanca en la que los principales asesores califican al presidente de idiota. En la época de Nixon, su lugarteniente Henry Kissinger llamaba al jefe mente de albóndiga a sus espaldas. La diferencia es que en esa época no existía Twitter y el presidente de Estados Unidos no ventilaba sus pensamientos como lo hace Trump, sus pensamientos íntimos, aunque pudiera hacerlo. Este es un presidente que dice públicamente las cosas que sabemos por grabaciones que Nixon decía en la intimidad, dijo el historiador Timothy Naftali, un exdirector de la Biblioteca Presidencial y Museo Richard Nixon. Es como si Trump se debatiera públicamente con la historia de Watergate. Es el presidente quien invita a buscar estos paralelismos. La lista de nombres a los que Trump considera enemigos es evidente en su cuenta de Twitter. Incluye antiguos adversarios políticos, su propio secretario de Justicia, su predecesor y exfuncionarios de seguridad nacional, a quienes amenaza con quitarles el acceso a la información confidencial. A este se suma ahora un alto funcionario anónimo, autor de la columna de opinión en el periódico The New York Times, que califica al presidente de amoral. El autor habla de un estado firme, entre comillas, dentro del gobierno que trata de contener los impulsos erráticos de Trump, una descripción que roza la del estado profundo, que según el presidente resiste sus medidas. Trump dijo el viernes que el Departamento de Justicia debería averiguar la identidad del autor anónimo. En la época de Nixon, un memorando de la Casa Blanca fechado el 16 de agosto del 1971 se preguntaba ¿cómo podemos utilizar la maquinaria federal disponible para fastidiar a nuestros enemigos políticos? Se pensó en acusaciones penales, juicios y la denegación de subsidios y contratos, y se pidió a los fieles que aportaran nombres a la lista. La lista de enemigos de Nixon fue redactada por Dean, el abogado apañador que abandonó la lealtad a Nixon y que luego ayudó a derribarlo de la presidencia. Los demócratas le pidieron que compareciera en las audiencias del Senado sobre la Corte Suprema en calidad de experto sobre el Poder Ejecutivo. Se presentó como un hombre más rico en años y experiencia. Hay mucho que temer de parte de un presidente desenfrenado que está dispuesto a abusar de sus poderes, dijo Dean. Es un hecho del que puedo dar fe por experiencia personal. Como asesor jurídico del presidente, Dean dispuso que se pagara a los ladrones que entraron a las oficinas demócratas en el edificio Watergate en busca de material que ayudara a la reelección de Nixon en el 1972. Dean participó en el encubrimiento de la culpabilidad de Nixon hasta que rompió relaciones con él y declaró ante la Comisión Watergate del Senado. Su testimonio resultó fulminante. Fue condenado a 4 meses de cárcel por obstrucción de justicia y Nixon renunció ante la amenaza de una destitución mediante juicio político. La contraparte parcial de Dean es Michael Cohen, el ex abogado personal del presidente que dispuso pagar sobornos a mujeres que dicen haber tenido relaciones sexuales con Trump. Cohen se declaró culpable de 8 cargos penales y dijo en una corte federal que violó las leyes de financiación de campaña como parte de un encubrimiento ordenado por Trump, algo que el presidente niega. Otro equivalente posible es Don McGahn, el asesor jurídico de la Casa Blanca que ha cooperado con los investigadores y que ha declarado durante horas. Todavía no está claro si el material entregado por McGahn perjudica al presidente. Trump no está acusado de delito alguno y la serie de condenas de colaboradores de campaña obtenidas por Mueller no han revelado que exista colusión entre Moscú y el equipo de campaña de Trump. No hay pruebas contundentes. Hasta el momento, los paralelismos con Watergate son parciales, dice Naftali. Sin embargo, el manual de Nixon de juego sucio, abuso de poder y espionaje político es una fuente útil de preguntas para cualquier investigación de una presidencia impulsiva, errática y potencialmente penal, dijo. Estaremos atentos. La presidencia de Nixon nos enseña cómo evitar que nuestros presidentes hagan lo que hizo Nixon. Son aproximadamente las 3 de la tarde, con 37 minutos es la hora en los estudios de Audio Journal. Así que estamos aquí a mitad del programa. Vamos a leer algo divertido, el boletín comunitario. Aquí hay una foto que enviaron los amigos de Onyx y Manolín y sus familiares también. Con muchas felicidades para Onyx y Manolín. El pasado 8 de septiembre unieron sus vidas con la bendición de los sacerdotes Nelson Rivera y Hugo Cano en la iglesia Joan of Arc. Por tal motivo, sus hijos Nelson, Onyx, Giselle, Camille, Yasmín y Caneli, sus amigos Juan y Mirna, les desean muchas felicidades en esta nueva etapa de sus vidas. Y ahora entonces la sección de calendarios de eventos. Vamos a ver qué eventos divertidos hay aquí. Nos dice que cada miércoles hay clases gratis de ciudadanía aquí en Worcester. Y esas clases cubren materiales de examen. Todos los miércoles de 5:30 a 7 de la tarde en nuestra biblioteca aquí de Worcester, nuestra biblioteca pública, Worcester Public Library, que está localizada en el número 3 de Salem Square, aquí en Worcester. Para más información sobre clases de ciudadanía en nuestra biblioteca pública de Worcester, por favor llamen al 508-799-1655, extensión 3. Reitero, 508-799-1655, extensión 3. Y mañana sábado 14 de septiembre hay una actividad en el pueblo de Brockton. Nos dice que se titula Hispanic Heritage Day a la 1 de la tarde para celebrar nuestra herencia hispánica en el pueblo de Brockton. Esto será en la biblioteca pública del pueblo de Brockton. Mañana está localizada en el 304 de la calle Main, en Brockton. Y el domingo 16 de septiembre, otra actividad gratis es una parada puertorriqueña en Springfield. Comienza a las 11 de la mañana el domingo y dura hasta las 2 de la tarde. Comienza en la calle Main y termina en Bowland Way en Springfield. Y ahora entonces, el jueves 20 de septiembre, una actividad gratis en el pueblo de Lawrence. Se titula Massachusetts National Hispanic Heritage. Otra actividad celebrando nuestra herencia hispánica. Esta es en otro pueblo, en el pueblo de Lawrence, el jueves 20 de septiembre de 5:30 a 8 de la noche. Es un taller informativo para pequeños negocios latinos. Así que es un taller informativo para pequeños negocios latinos, dice aquí, de 5:30 de la tarde hasta las 8 de la noche en Everett Mills, localizado en el 15 de la calle Union, en el pueblo de Lawrence. Para más información, 617-565-8510, 617-565-8510. Y entonces el jueves 25 del mes que viene, en octubre, jueves 25 de octubre, en nuestra capital aquí en Massachusetts, en Boston, habrá un concierto de jazz para recaudar fondos para las víctimas del huracán María de Puerto Rico, de 7 de la tarde hasta las 10 de la noche en la iglesia llamada First Church of Boston. Está localizada en el número 66 de la calle Marlborough, en Boston. Así que reitero, concierto de jazz para recaudar fondos para las víctimas del huracán María en la iglesia First Church of Boston. 66 está localizada en 66 de Marlborough, en Boston. Y ahora entonces, el miércoles 26 de septiembre habrá una noche de películas. La película que estarán allí en vista en la biblioteca pública del pueblo de Clinton se llama Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. de 5:30 hasta las 7:30 de la tarde, una película familiar. La puede ver toda su familia en el Bigelow Free Public Library, la biblioteca de Clinton, localizada en el número 54 de la calle Walnut, en Clinton. Y el jueves 27 de septiembre, gratis, dice ejercicios de yoga, gentle yoga. Únete a ellos a una clase de yoga suave adecuada para todos los niveles de yoga, de 6 a 7 de la tarde en la biblioteca de Clinton. Nuevamente, número 54 de la calle Walnut en Clinton. Y ahora entonces recuerde que Worcester tiene un flea market, así que este fin de semana va a estar soleado. Así que salga afuera, aproveche estos últimos días de sol porque ya mismo viene el invierno, el otoño. Así que Worcester tiene un flea market todos los domingos de 9 de la mañana hasta las 4 de la tarde, localizada en el número 4 de la avenida Queen Segament, aquí en Worcester. Y ahora entonces vamos a leer la sección de bienes raíces desde New York. Se reporta, New York prohíbe fumar al interior de las viviendas públicas. El Departamento de Vivienda del Ayuntamiento de New York instauró desde el pasado 30 de julio la prohibición de fumar en los pisos de protección oficial, en las zonas comunes de los edificios e incluso en las aceras más cercanas. La nueva política anunciada por la Autoridad de la Vivienda de la ciudad prohíbe el uso de cigarrillos puros, pipas y narguiles en áreas comunes interiores dentro de las unidades de vivienda pública, en oficinas administrativas y en áreas al aire libre a menos de 8 metros de los edificios pertenecientes a la protección oficial. La iniciativa libre de humo está diseñada para crear hogares más saludables para los residentes y entornos de trabajo más saludables para los empleados, a reducir la exposición al humo de segunda mano y brindar apoyo a los residentes y empleados que fuman. Y ahora entonces, en asuntos legales, Corte prohíbe penalizar a quienes duerman en la calle, reporta Rebecca Boone desde Idaho. Las ciudades no deben enjuiciar a personas que duerman en la calle si no tienen otro lugar a donde ir, porque ello representa un castigo cruel e inusual, falló el martes una Corte Federal de Apelaciones. La Corte de Apelaciones del 9º Circuito dio la razón a 6 indigentes habitantes de Idaho que demandaron a la ciudad en el 2009 debido a un decreto local que prohibía dormir en espacios públicos. El fallo podría afectar a otras ciudades del oeste del país con normas similares. Muchas localidades en la costa oeste enfrentan dificultades por la indigencia, un fenómeno que se ha recrudecido por el aumento en los costos de las viviendas y la desigualdad de ingresos. Cuando la demanda contra Boise en Idaho fue incoada, los abogados de los indigentes dijeron que 4.500 personas no tenían un lugar para dormir en la capital de Idaho y solo había unas 700 camas o colchonetas en albergues. Durante años, el caso fue abordado por diversos tribunales y Boise modificó sus normativas en el 2014 para estipular que los indigentes no podían ser procesados por dormir en la calle durante la noche cuando no hubiera cupo en los albergues locales. Pero esa decisión no resolvió el problema, dijeron los abogados, porque los albergues en Boise, Idaho, restringen el número de días que las personas pueden quedarse. 2 de los 3 albergues de la ciudad exigen alguna forma de participación religiosa en algunos programas, aspecto que los vuelve inconvenientes para personas con distintas creencias, señalaron los indigentes. Los 3 jueces del panel del 9º Circuito determinaron que las normativas sobre los albergues implican que los indigentes están en riesgo de ser enjuiciados cuando haya cupo. Los jueces también dijeron que el enfoque religioso de algunos programas de albergue era un problema. Una ciudad no puede, mediante la amenaza de juicio, coaccionar a un individuo para que asista a programas de atención de corte religioso, de conformidad con la cláusula de establecimiento de la primera enmienda, escribió la jueza Marsha Burson. El problema más grande fue que las normativas de la ciudad infringían la octava enmienda de la Constitución de Estados Unidos con un castigo cruel e inusual, determinó la Corte. Burson escribió que en esencia la octava enmienda cumple tres aspectos: restringe el tipo de castigo que el gobierno puede imponer, prohíbe los castigos excesivamente desproporcionados a la severidad del delito y limita las conductas que el gobierno puede penalizar. La tercera limitante es procedente en el caso de Boise, Idaho, escribió Burson. Como resultado, como el Estado no puede penalizar el ser indigente en lugares públicos, el Estado no puede penalizar una conducta que es consecuencia inevitable de ser indigente, es decir, estar sentado, acostado o durmiendo en las calles, escribió Burson. En otras palabras, mientras no haya más opción que dormir en la calle, el gobierno no puede penalizar a los indigentes que lo hagan, según el tribunal. Son aproximadamente la hora en los estudios de Audio Journal, las 3 de la tarde con 49 minutos. Es la hora en los estudios de Audio Journal. Y continuando con la sección de Asuntos Legales, Charbonnier Laureano atemperará lenguaje en el tema de adopción. Desde San Juan, Puerto Rico, se reporta que la presidenta de la Comisión de lo Jurídico, María Milagros Charbonnier, reiteró que cambiará el lenguaje sobre las adopciones como dicta la ley actualmente en Puerto Rico. Sus expresiones surgen luego de que la secretaria del Departamento de la Familia, DF, Glorimar Andújar Matos, opinara que el nuevo Código Civil debe ser atemperado a la Ley de Adopción de Puerto Rico, que permite que parejas del mismo sexo puedan adoptar. Recomendamos que el articulado se atempere al ordenamiento jurídico vigente conforme establecido en la exposición de motivos del proyecto de la Cámara 1654 para crear el nuevo código, expresó. Amplió que el Tribunal de los Estados Unidos en el caso Auburn Jeffel contra Hodge del 2015 resolvió que el matrimonio es un derecho fundamental que corresponde a todas las parejas de conformidad de la enmienda de la Constitución de Estados Unidos